Her car lay sideways in a ditch, smoke curling from the hood, expensive high heels sunk deep in mud as rain poured down in sheets. And then he appeared, a veteran and single father, quiet in his worn flannel shirt, calloused hands that once repaired fighter planes, now holding an umbrella over her head, like it was the most natural thing in the world. She was the powerful businesswoman at the helm of a billion-dollar aerospace empire. But what he discovered while fixing her car would change not just their lives, but the history of a town the entire country had forgotten. Riverdale Mills, Pennsylvania stood like a monument to forgotten American dreams. Once proud brick buildings lined Main Street, their facades weathered by decades of industrial prosperity, followed by cruel economic abandonment. The morning sun illuminated empty storefronts where for lease signs had yellowed with age, some dating back to 2008, when the last major employer, Keystone Steel, had shuttered its doors during the financial crisis. The town water tower still proclaimed, "Riverdale Mills, Steel Built America," in faded blue lettering. During World War II, the town had hummed with three-shift production, turning out critical steel components for warplanes and ships. Now, in the autumn of 2023, the town seemed to be slowly exhaling its final breath. The median age had climbed to 58 as young people fled for opportunities elsewhere. At the edge of town, beyond the rusted railroad tracks, stood the abandoned Keystone Mill complex. Its broken windows and massive silent buildings created a skyline of industrial ghosts. The complex sprawled across 30 acres, a maze of manufacturing halls, administrative buildings, and mysterious outbuildings, whose purposes had been forgotten by all but the oldest residents. Frank Wilson, 75, former mill worker and Vietnam veteran, often sat at Martha's Diner watching the old place through the window. That mill powered this town for 80 years. He'd tell anyone who'd listen. Started making railroad components in the 1890s, converted to military production in 41, and kept this town alive until the suits decided American steel wasn't profitable enough anymore. But not everyone in Riverdale Mills had surrendered to slow extinction. At the far end of Main Street, a neon sign flickered to life each morning at 7 a.m. sharp. "Sullivan's Fix It. If it's broke, we'll make it right." Jack Sullivan moved with the practiced efficiency of a man who had learned to make every motion count. At 38, his 6-foot frame carried the lean muscle of someone who worked with his hands daily. His dark hair, kept short in an echo of his military days, was beginning to gray at the temples. 3 combat tours in Afghanistan and the struggle of raising a son alone in a dying town had left their mark. The morning routine at Sullivan's Fix-It garage began the same way every day. Jack rose at 5:30 a.m., made coffee in the small apartment above the garage, and spent 30 minutes reviewing the day's work orders. By 6:15, he was waking his son for school, making breakfast, and checking homework. At 7:00, the neon sign came on, and Jack Sullivan became the mechanic that Riverdale Mills depended on. Jack had returned to his hometown in 2015 after 12 years in the U.S. Special Forces. As a mechanical specialist, he had maintained and modified vehicles and aircraft in some of the most hostile environments on Earth. In the mountains of Afghanistan, those skills had saved lives. In Riverdale Mills, they earned him a modest living and the town's respect. The garage had been his father's before him. Joseph Sullivan, a Korean War veteran, had opened it in 1955, running it until his heart gave out in 2012. The building itself was a sturdy brick structure with 3 service bays and the small 2-bedroom apartment above where Jack had grown up and where he now raised his own son. "Dad?" a small voice called from the office doorway. Jack slid out from under Mrs. Abernathy's 2005 Buick, wiping his hands on a rag tucked into his belt. "What's up, buddy? Thought you were working on your science project." Tommy Sullivan, 7 years old, with his father's dark hair and his absent mother's blue eyes, stood holding a contraption made of cardboard, aluminum foil, and what appeared to be parts from an old DVD player. "I fixed it. The wings rotate when you press this button." He demonstrated pride evident in his gap-toothed smile as the makeshift propeller spun. Jack crouched down, examining the device with genuine interest. Unlike many parents who feigned enthusiasm for their children's creations, Jack's appreciation was authentic. He recognized in his son the same mechanical intuition he'd possessed at that age. "That's impressive engineering, Tommy. How'd you figure out the motor connection?" "I used the diagram in that old aviation book, the one with the World War II planes." Tommy's eyes shone with excitement. "Mr. Henley says it might win first prize at the science fair." Jack smiled, ruffling his son's hair. Mr. Henley's probably right. That's some serious innovation. Tommy beamed at the praise. Can I work on it in the office? I'll be super quiet while you fix Mrs. Abernathy's car. Deal, but homework first when we get home tonight, okay? Promise. Tommy scampered to the small office, carefully placing his project on the desk. Jack watched him go, feeling the familiar mixture of pride and anxiety that defined his fatherhood. Tommy was brilliant, everyone said so. His teachers suggested advanced programs opportunities that Riverdale Mills couldn't provide. Jack knew his son deserved every chance to develop his gifts, yet the thought of leaving the only community they had terrified him. The alternative, moving to a city where they knew no one, where Jack would likely work longer hours for a corporate garage, where Tommy would be just another face in an overcrowded classroom, seemed unbearable. Jack slid back under the Buick, thoughts turning to Diane as they often did when he worried about Tommy's future. She had left when Tommy was 3, departing for New York with dreams of a legal career too big for a small Pennsylvania town. For 4 years, she had remained a ghost in their lives, birthday cards with no return address, occasional phone calls that grew increasingly awkward as Tommy struggled to connect with a mother who existed only as a voice on the phone. 400 miles away, in a glass-walled conference room overlooking the Potomac River, Morgan Adler stood her ground against 5 men in identical Navy suits. At 42, she commanded the room not through volume, but with the quiet confidence of someone accustomed to power. Her tailor-made charcoal pantsuit and simple pearl earrings projected understated wealth. Gentlemen, the Department of Defense contract is already signed. Adler Aeronautics will deliver the first generation of Aurora drones by next quarter, as agreed. Her voice carried the faintest trace of her Virginia upbringing. The question isn't whether we'll deliver, but how we'll improve production capacity to meet increased demand. Edward Maxwell, CEO of rival Maxwell Industries and the most vocal member of the Aerospace Consortium meeting, leaned forward. At 65, with silver hair and the ruddy complexion of a man who enjoyed expensive scotch and private golf courses, he represented old money and established power. Morgan, we all appreciate your company's innovative approach. His smile never reached his eyes. But the reality is that Adler's facilities are already at maximum capacity. The consortium's concern is that you've overpromised to secure a contract that should have been distributed among established manufacturers. The implication was clear. Adler Aeronautics, despite its $4 billion valuation, was still considered an upstart by the old guard. Founded by Morgan's grandfather, William Adler, in 1948, the company had begun as a small parts supplier for military aircraft. Under her father's leadership, it had grown to become a respected mid-tier defense contractor. But it was Morgan who had transformed the company over the past decade, pivoting toward drone technology when others still focused on traditional aircraft. My facilities are my concern, Edward. Morgan maintained eye contact. Perhaps if Maxwell Industries had invested in drone R&D 5 years ago, when my company first identified the shift in defense priorities, you wouldn't be quite so concerned about Adler's production capacity today. The meeting adjourned with handshakes that ranged from genuinely respectful to barely concealed hostility. Morgan's assistant, Richard Chen, fell into step beside her as they left the building. Your Tesla is waiting, but the weather report for Western Pennsylvania looks problematic. The pilot says we can still get the company jet to Pittsburgh, but we'd need to leave within the hour. Morgan checked her watch. The meeting with the engineers at Westford Lab is tomorrow morning. I'd rather drive tonight and have time to review the prototype specs in my hotel. The storm shouldn't be a factor until I'm well past the mountains. As the sleek black Tesla pulled away from the curb, Morgan leaned back against the leather seat, allowing herself a moment of fatigue. The drive to Pittsburgh would take about 4 hours in good weather, with the approaching storm possibly longer. Morgan's thoughts turned to the real challenge awaiting her, finding additional production capacity that didn't exist. The Aurora drone represented cutting-edge technology requiring specialized manufacturing processes that couldn't simply be outsourced. Her phone rang her father's ringtone. With a sigh, she connected the call through the car's system. Hello, Father. Morgan, James Adler's voice filled the car, crisp and authoritative, even at 72. I understand you took the Pentagon contract without consulting the board. No greeting, no pleasantries, typical James Adler. As chairman emeritus, he had officially stepped down from day-to-day operations 3 years ago, but his shadow still loomed large over the company. The opportunity required immediate action. The board has been briefed. And your production plan, Edward Maxwell called me directly after your meeting. Morgan's jaw tightened. Of course he did. The production plan is being finalized. I'll present it Monday. Maxwell suggested we consider a joint venture. His Allegheny facility has capacity we could utilize. Absolutely not. Morgan's response was immediate. Maxwell wants access to our technology. Give him an inch and he'll take the entire Aurora program. A pause. You're probably right, but you need a solution, Morgan. The Adler name stands for reliability. Your grandfather built this company on his word and I expanded it the same way. I'm well aware of the family legacy, Father. Morgan watched raindrops begin to speckle the windshield as the Tesla merged onto the highway. I'll find the capacity we need without compromising our position. The call ended, leaving Morgan alone with the sound of increasing rain against the car's roof. Her relationship with her father had always been complex, a mixture of respect, expectation, and perpetual evaluation. James Adler had raised his only daughter to take over the family business, instilling in her the same unyielding standards by which he measured himself. What he hadn't taught her was how to create a life beyond work. At 42, Morgan lived alone in a penthouse apartment she rarely saw before 9 p.m. Her friendships were few and often intertwined with business relationships. Romance had been occasional and brief, usually ending when partners realized they would always come second to Adler Aeronautics. Outside, the rain intensified as the storm system moved east across Pennsylvania. Morgan increased the wiper speed and focused on the road ahead, unaware that the answer she sought lay not in Pittsburgh, but in a dying steel town she would soon encounter by chance or perhaps by fate. The rain came sideways now, driven by gusting winds that bent trees along the rural highway. Jack Sullivan peered through the windshield of his Ford F-150, the wipers struggling against the deluge as he drove back from Frank Wilson's house. Tommy had been so engaged in his chess lesson that Jack had decided to let him stay for dinner, using the extra time to finish Mrs. Abernathy's brakes and handle a sudden emergency repair for the town's only ambulance. "Sullivan's Fix-It, this is Jack," he answered as his phone rang, keeping his eyes on the treacherous road. "Jack, it's Martha from the diner." Her voice crackled with static. "Power's out all over downtown. My generator's running the fridges, but I've got half a dozen travelers stranded here with the interstate being closed." "Interstate's closed." Jack hadn't heard that update. "Just announced it, flooding at the mountain pass. Highway patrols diverting everyone through Riverdale. We're going to have folks needing rooms for the night, but the Riverside Motel lost power too." Jack sighed, knowing what was coming. In emergencies, Riverdale Mills pulled together one of the few times the town still felt like a community. "You need me to take some people in. Could you manage to? The Hendersons are taking a family, and Pastor Williams is opening the church basement, but we're still short on space. I've got the pull-out couch in the office and can set up an air mattress in the living room. Send them my way when they're ready." After ending the call, Jack slowed the truck further, noticing how quickly conditions were deteriorating. The two-lane highway that connected Riverdale Mills to the interstate was now partially flooded in low-lying areas. About 3 miles from town, Jack's high beams illuminated an unexpected sight. A black Tesla had slid partially off the road, its front end angled into a drainage ditch. Hazard lights blinked frantically against the gathering darkness. Jack pulled over immediately, grabbing his heavy-duty flashlight and rain jacket from behind the seat. Years of military service had instilled an instinct to respond to emergencies, an instinct that had saved lives in Afghanistan and now governed his reactions even on a stormy Pennsylvania highway. He approached the stranded vehicle cautiously, flashlight beam cutting through the rain. Inside, he could make out a single occupant, a woman in business attire attempting to make a call on her cell phone. He tapped lightly on the window. The woman startled, then composed herself and lowered the window slightly. "Car trouble!" Jack had to raise his voice above the howling wind. "Hydroplaned on a curve. I can't get traction to back out." Her voice was controlled, but Jack noted the tension in her posture. "Mind if I take a look? I'm a mechanic." He directed the flashlight beam toward the front of the car, where the sleek Tesla's nose was buried in mud. "You're not going to drive out of that. I can tow you with my truck." The woman hesitated, then nodded. "My phone has no service out here." "Tower's probably down from the storm. Happens a lot in these hills. Jack studied her more carefully now. Designer suit pearl earrings, short brown hair styled expensively. Everything about her screamed, not from around here. You need to get out while I hook up the toe strap. Watch your step, it's all mud. She opened the door and immediately regretted her footwear choice. Expensive heels sank into 3 inches of mud, and rain soaked her light jacket within seconds. Jack automatically held his flashlight higher to illuminate her path and stepped closer to shield her from the worst of the downpour. Jack Sullivan, he offered, raising his voice above the storm. Morgan Adler, she replied, extending a hand in a gesture that seemed oddly formal given the circumstances. Jack shook it briefly, noting the surprising firmness of her grip. You're a long way from anywhere, Miss Adler. Headed to Pittsburgh. She nodded, rainwater streaming down her face despite Jack's attempt to block the worst of it. Business meeting tomorrow morning. GPS rerouted me because of the interstate closure. Yeah, these back roads aren't great in weather like this. Jack directed his flashlight toward his truck. Let's get you out of this rain while I hook up the tow. Morgan followed him to the truck, struggling in her impractical shoes. Without comment, Jack opened the passenger door and helped her climb in, then retrieved a blanket from behind the seat. Engine's running, so the heat's on. This might help with the chill. She accepted the rough wool blanket with murmured thanks, and Jack closed the door, returning to the task at hand. The rain pounded against his jacket as he worked efficiently, securing a heavy tow strap between the vehicles. Within 10 minutes, he had the Tesla secured. He climbed back into the driver's seat, water streaming from his jacket. Your car should be okay, but I need to pull it out carefully. These Teslas have their batteries on the undercarriage, don't want to damage anything. Morgan looked surprised at his knowledge of electric vehicles. You work on Teslas often. Jack allowed himself a small smile. Not in Riverdale Mills, but I keep up with the technology. Never know what might come through the door. He operated the truck with practiced skill, easing the Tesla back onto the roadway. Once it was secure, he hopped out again to disconnect the tow strap, returning to the cab, soaked but satisfied. Your car seems okay mechanically, but I noticed your right front tire looks low. Might have been damaged when you went off the road. He started the truck moving again, slowly navigating the flooded highway. Interstate's closed and this storm isn't letting up. Where were you planning to stay tonight? Morgan checked her phone again. I had a reservation in Pittsburgh, but without the interstate. She frowned at the no service indicator on her screen. Nearest hotel with power is in Westbrook, about 40 miles from here, but parts of that road are probably underwater by now. Jack glanced at her. Riverdale Mills is about 3 miles ahead. Not much to look at, but we've got a diner with hot coffee, and folks are taking in stranded travelers for the night. Morgan seemed to be calculating options. Is there a garage in town where my car can be checked tomorrow? You're looking at the owner. Sullivan's Fix It. Jack navigated around a large puddle. I can check your tire in the morning, make sure everything else is running properly before you head out. A particularly strong gust of wind buffeted the truck, and Jack tightened his grip on the wheel. Morgan glanced at him, then at the storm raging outside. Riverdale Mills sounds like the prudent choice, Mr. Sullivan. Jack, he corrected automatically. Just Jack. And yeah, it's the only safe option tonight. As they drove toward town, the rain beating a steady rhythm on the roof, neither could have anticipated how this chance encounter would ultimately change not just their lives, but the fate of Riverdale Mills itself. Martha's Diner stood as a beacon in the darkened town, its windows glowing with the warm light of emergency lanterns. The vintage 1950s establishment, with its chrome fixtures and red vinyl booths, had served as Riverdale's unofficial community center for decades. Jack parked his truck behind the diner, where a makeshift line of vehicles had formed, mostly out-of-towners, caught by the interstate closure. He turned to Morgan, who was attempting to restore order to her appearance. Martha runs the best diner in 3 counties. She'll have hot coffee and probably some homemade soup on the gas stove. He reached behind the seat and pulled out a worn but clean Carhartt jacket. You might want this. Your suit jacket's soaked through. Morgan hesitated, then accepted the offered garment. Thank you. Inside the diner hummed with the subdued energy of people making the best of an unexpected situation. Martha Collins, a spry woman of 68 with silver hair, pulled into a practical bun, orchestrated the chaos with the efficiency of a battlefield commander. Jack Sullivan, about time you showed up, she called when she spotted him. Frank brought Tommy here about 20 minutes ago. He's showing some travelers his science project. She nodded toward a booth where Tommy sat surrounded by an enthralled audience as he demonstrated his makeshift flying machine. Sorry, Martha, got sidetracked. Jack gestured to Morgan. Found someone who needed a tow. This is Morgan Adler. She was headed to Pittsburgh when the storm caught her. Martha's keen eyes took in Morgan's expensive shoes, tailored pants, and the incongruous work jacket. Well, you're safe now, dear. Interstate won't reopen before morning at the earliest. She turned back to Jack. I've assigned you two guests. The Anderson couple over there, retired teachers from Ohio. They can take your pull-out couch. Jack nodded, then glanced at Morgan. Make that 3 guests. Ms. Adler needs a place too. Martha raised an eyebrow but recovered quickly. Of course, I'll find someone else for the air mattress. Ms. Adler can have the spare room at your place. She lowered her voice. It's the most private option we can offer tonight. Jack knew what she meant. His apartment above the garage, while modest, was the only available accommodation that offered a private bedroom. The church basement, the Hendersons' living room, and other makeshift shelters would all be communal spaces tonight. If that's acceptable to you, Ms. Adler, he added. Morgan seemed to be processing the situation, stranded in a small town, dependent on strangers, her carefully planned schedule derailed. That's very kind of you both, and please call me Morgan. For the next hour, Jack and Morgan remained at the diner while Tommy showcased his invention to the stranded travelers. Frank Wilson joined them, sizing up Morgan with the careful assessment of a man who had spent decades working alongside all types. Not Pittsburgh, he murmured to Jack. Those shoes are New York or D.C., and that watch is worth more than my truck. Eventually, Jack collected Tommy and the Andersons, and they all made their way to Sullivan's Fix-It. The garage stood dark due to the power outage, but Jack had a generator that provided basic electricity to the apartment above. The living room was small but tidy, with worn but clean furniture. Tommy's model airplanes hung from the ceiling, and bookshelves lined one wall filled with an eclectic mix of mechanical manuals, military history, and children's books. It's not fancy, but it's home, Jack said, switching on battery-powered lanterns. Tommy, can you show Mr. and Mrs. Anderson where the bathroom is while I get the spare room ready for Morgan? While Tommy guided the grateful couple, Jack led Morgan to a small bedroom at the end of the hall. It had been his father's room, and Jack had preserved it largely as it was simple functional, with a comfortable double bed and a dresser topped with photographs of 3 generations of Sullivan men, all in military uniform. Sorry about the decor, it was my father's room. Jack switched on a battery lantern. There are clean towels in the dresser, and the bathroom is across the hall. If you need anything else, just ask. Morgan set her purse, the only luggage she had, from the car on the bed. This is more than generous, especially on such short notice. I appreciate the hospitality. There was a formality to her gratitude that Jack found both proper and slightly distant. He wondered what she was like in her normal environment, away from the disruption of storms and strangers. Well, we'll let you get settled. Kitchen's at the end of the hall if you need water or anything. By 10:30 p.m., the apartment was quiet except for Mr. Anderson's soft snoring from the pull-out couch. Jack sat at the small kitchen table, a battery lantern casting shadows as he reviewed invoices, by hand since the computer was offline. From down the hall came the soft sound of a phone conversation, Morgan's voice too low to make out words, but the tone suggested business rather than personal communication. Jack found himself wondering about her, this polished woman so far removed from Riverdale Mill's usual visitors. What business brought her to Pittsburgh? What life did she return to when this detour ended? By tomorrow afternoon, Morgan Adler would continue to whatever important meeting awaited her. Riverdale Mill's just a brief inconvenience in her schedule. Yet as he prepared for bed, Jack couldn't shake the feeling that something significant had occurred, not just the storm or the rescue, but something less tangible. As if the universe had momentarily aligned 2 completely different worlds for some purpose yet to be revealed. Morning arrived with pale sunlight filtering through dissipating clouds. Jack woke at his usual 5:30 a.m., moving quietly through his morning routine to avoid disturbing his guests. To his surprise, he found Morgan already awake, seated at the kitchen table with her phone and a notepad, dressed in yesterday's clothes but somehow looking as put together as circumstances allowed. "Morning," he greeted softly. "Hope you got some sleep." She looked up, offering a small but genuine smile. "I did, thank you. Your home is remarkably quiet compared to my apartment in D.C. No sirens, no traffic. One of the benefits of a dying town, Jack replied, starting coffee on the gas stove. Few enough people left to make much noise. Morgan watched as he efficiently navigated the kitchen, setting out mugs and finding the emergency radio to check weather updates. There was an economy to his movements that spoke of military training. Nothing wasted, everything purposeful. The interstate is still closed due to flooding, she noted, checking her phone, but the highway department expects to reopen it by noon. Jack nodded, pouring coffee for them both. That sounds right. Local roads should be passable once the creek levels drop. I can check your car this morning, make sure everything's roadworthy before you head out. I appreciate that. Morgan accepted the offered mug. Martha mentioned you were in the military. Special Forces, 12 years. Jack sat across from her, hands cradling his own mug. Vehicle and aircraft maintenance specialist. Morgan's expression showed new interest. Aircraft maintenance, what types? Everything from Blackhawks to modified light reconnaissance craft, specialized in electrical systems and field adaptations. He took a sip of coffee. Not the usual topic of breakfast conversation around here. I have a professional interest. Morgan set down her mug. I'm the CEO of Adler Aeronautics. We manufacture drone systems primarily for defense applications, though we're expanding into civilian sectors. Jack's expression remained neutral, but his assessment of her shifted. Not just a businesswoman, but the head of a major defense contractor. That explained the expensive clothes, the authority in her bearing. Adler, I know the name. You folks made the targeting systems for the MQ-9s I worked with in Afghanistan. The conversation paused as Tommy appeared in the doorway, hair tousled from sleep, clutching his favorite model airplane. Morning, Dad. Morning, Ms. Morgan. After Tommy was settled with breakfast and the Andersons had joined them, Morgan observed the interactions with thoughtful eyes. When everyone had finished eating and Tommy was showing the Andersons his bedroom, Morgan helped Jack clear the dishes. Jack, Morgan set down her coffee mug. I don't usually believe in coincidence. Meeting you, someone with advanced aircraft maintenance experience during a crisis related to our production capacity, it feels significant. Jack waited for her to continue. Adler Aeronautics needs skilled technicians and engineers for our Aurora program. People with real-world experience modifying and maintaining aircraft in challenging conditions. She leaned forward slightly. I'd like to offer you a position, senior technical specialist. The salary would be substantially more than what a small-town mechanic makes. Jack finished for her, his tone neutral rather than offended. I'm sure it would be. It would also include comprehensive benefits, a housing allowance in Northern Virginia, and access to excellent schools for Tommy. Morgan's voice took on the practiced cadence of someone accustomed to making compelling offers. His aptitude for engineering could be nurtured in ways that simply aren't possible here. Jack's response was thoughtful. Why are you offering me a job? You've known me less than 12 hours. I recognize talent and experience when I see it. Your military background alone would qualify you. But I've also observed how you handled the emergency last night, how you maintain this place, how you've raised your son. You're exactly the kind of person we need. And the fact that I helped you when your car was stuck has nothing to do with it. A slight flush colored Morgan's cheeks. I don't make business decisions based on personal gratitude. I appreciate the offer, Morgan. It's generous, but my life is here. She glanced around the modest kitchen, then back to Jack with an expression that suggested she found his response baffling. Here, in a town that's clearly dying with a garage that can barely support you and Tommy. It's not about the money. Jack arranged pancakes on plates as Tommy and the Andersons entered the kitchen, temporarily halting their conversation. After breakfast, Morgan helped Jack clear the dishes, an action that seemed automatic rather than calculated. I don't think you understand what I'm offering, she said quietly as they worked. This isn't just a job. It's security for you and Tommy, a future with real opportunities. Jack rinsed a plate before responding. I understand exactly what you're offering and what I'd be giving up to accept it. And what's that exactly, Ron? Jack gestured toward the window where the view encompassed a slice of Riverdale Mills. Community, roots, people who know us, who look out for Tommy when I have emergency repairs who remember his birthday without Facebook reminders. He set down the dish towel and faced her directly. I worked jobs in the military that paid triple what I earn now, but they made me a ghost in my son's life. I missed his first steps, his first words, his first day of school. I won't do that again. Morgan seemed genuinely perplexed. But you wouldn't have to. This would be a civilian position, regular hours, in Northern Virginia with DC traffic. In a corporate environment where 70-hour weeks are probably standard. Jack shook his head. I know how defense contractors operate, Morgan. You're making assumptions. Am I wrong? Morgan's silence was answer enough. Jack continued more gently. I appreciate the offer, I do. But Tommy needs stability, continuity. He needs his friends, his school, this town, even with all its limitations. And I need to be present for him, not just financially, but physically and emotionally. Morgan studied him for a long moment, and Jack had the sense she was seeing something new, something that challenged her worldview. You're turning down a six-figure salary to fix cars in a dying town. I'm choosing to be Tommy's father first and a worker second. Jack smiled slightly. No disrespect intended, but maybe your version of success isn't the only valid one. Tommy's laughter echoed from the hallway as he showed the Andersons something in his room. Morgan's gaze followed the sound, then returned to Jack. You've given me something to think about, Jack Sullivan. She straightened, professional demeanor returning. But my offer stands, should you reconsider. Jack nodded, understanding that for someone like Morgan Adler, rejection was an unfamiliar experience. Now let's check out your Tesla so you can get back on the road when they reopen the interstate. As they descended the stairs to the garage, Jack couldn't have known that this conversation was just the beginning, that Morgan Adler would indeed return to Riverdale Mills with a very different proposal, one that would change not just their lives, but the fate of an entire community. 3 weeks passed. The autumn chill deepened across western Pennsylvania, painting the hills surrounding Riverdale Mills with fiery oranges and deep crimsons. For Jack, Sullivan life had returned to its familiar rhythm. Morning coffee with Tommy's school drop-offs, the steady parade of vehicles through Sullivan's Fix-It, and quiet evenings helping with homework or building model airplanes. The storm that had brought Morgan Adler into their lives seemed like a distant memory, though Tommy occasionally asked about Ms. Morgan with the fancy car. On this particular Thursday afternoon, Jack was bent over the engine of Sheriff Donovan's cruiser, diagnosing an electrical issue that had stumped the county mechanics. Classic rock played from the garage's ancient radio, Tom Petty singing about an American girl, when the distinctive sound of performance tires on gravel made Jack straighten up. A black Tesla Model S rolled to a stop in front of the garage, immaculate despite the dusty rural roads. Jack wiped his hands on a shop rag, a smile tugging at the corner of his mouth. He'd wondered if he might see her again. Morgan Adler stepped out dressed in a charcoal pantsuit that probably cost more than Jack's monthly overhead. Unlike their first meeting, her footwear was sensible, elegant flats that suggested she'd planned for Riverdale's uneven sidewalks. Her short brown hair caught the afternoon sunlight as she removed designer sunglasses and surveyed the garage. Sullivan's Fix-It still making things right, I see, she called, approaching with the confident stride of someone accustomed to entering any room as if she owned it. Jack leaned against the garage doorframe. We try. Wasn't expecting to see you again, Ms. Adler. Morgan, she corrected, echoing his own words from their first meeting. And I said I'd let you know if I changed my mind. Jack raised an eyebrow. About the job offer, because my answer stands. Morgan smiled, a genuine expression that softened the professional polish. Not about the job, about the approach. She glanced at the sheriff's cruiser. Do you have a few minutes? I'd like to show you something. Curiosity won out over caution. Jack called to his part-time helper, Miguel, to continue with the cruiser's diagnostics, then followed Morgan to her car. She opened the passenger door, revealing not the expected leather interior, but a collection of blueprints, maps, and three-dimensional renderings spread across the seat. What am I looking at? Jack asked, leaning in to examine the materials. The future of Adler Aeronautics Rural Drone Initiatives. Morgan handed him a blueprint labeled Proposed Testing Facility, Rural Eastern Operations, and possibly the future of Riverdale Mills. Jack studied the schematic, his experienced eye quickly grasping the technical aspects. The blueprint showed a converted industrial facility with flight testing areas, maintenance hangars, and control centers. The design was elegant, efficient, and oddly familiar. He looked up sharply. "This is the old Keystone Mill complex." Morgan nodded, watching his reaction carefully. "The abandoned steel mill at the edge of town. 30 acres of industrial space with existing infrastructure that could be adapted to our needs." She handed him another document, a property assessment. "The current owners, Hudson Capital Group, are willing to sell. They've been trying to offload the property for years." Jack's mind raced ahead, connecting the dots. "You want to build a drone testing facility here in Riverdale Mills. I want to build a rural operations center that includes testing development and limited production capabilities." Morgan's tone was measured, as if she'd rehearsed this pitch. "The Aurora drone system is designed for deployment in remote areas, mountains, deserts, rural terrain. Testing it in controlled urban environments doesn't provide accurate performance data." Jack set the blueprints on the hood of the Tesla, scanning the other documents. "And you just happened to think of our dying steel town for this multi-million-dollar project." Morgan held his gaze. "I thought of you, Jack. Your military experience with drone systems in Afghanistan, your mechanical ingenuity, your understanding of how technology functions in non-ideal conditions." She gestured to the surrounding hills. "And yes, this location, rural but accessible, varied terrain, an existing industrial footprint that can be repurposed." Jack shook his head, a mixture of disbelief and wariness. "There are dozens of former industrial towns across Pennsylvania. Why Riverdale Mills?" "Because you're here," Morgan said simply, "and I need someone I can trust to run this operation." The statement hung in the air between them. Jack turned away, looking down the quiet main street of the town he'd known all his life. Faded storefronts, empty parking spaces, the diner where Martha served coffee to the same dozen regulars day after day. A town slowly fading into history. "What exactly are you proposing?" His voice was careful, neutral. Morgan stepped closer, indicating a detailed organizational chart. "I want you to lead the Riverdale operation. Build your own team. Set the technical standards. Create a rural drone testing and development center that operates on your terms, practical, functional, without corporate politics or unnecessary bureaucracy." Jack almost laughed. "I'm a garage mechanic with a high school diploma. You want me to run a multi-million-dollar aerospace facility? You're a Special Forces veteran with 12 years of hands-on experience with military aircraft systems, including drones." Morgan's tone left no room for self-deprecation. "Your educational credentials are your service record and proven expertise. I've researched your military background, Jack. Your commanding officers described you as the most innovative mechanical specialist in the theater of operations." A muscle tightened in Jack's jaw. He didn't like being investigated, but he couldn't deny the accuracy of her assessment. In Afghanistan, he'd modified drone systems to function in dust storms that grounded standard units. He'd rebuilt control systems from salvaged parts when supply chains failed. He'd done what was necessary with the resources available, the same approach he took at Sullivan's Fix-It. "You'd remain here in Riverdale Mills," Morgan continued, sensing his hesitation. "No relocation to Virginia, no corporate headquarters, no 70-hour weeks away from Tommy. You'd build something here in your community that creates wealth and opportunities, including for your son." Jack stared at the blueprints, imagining the possibilities. The abandoned mill transformed into a center of innovation. Young people returning to Riverdale for skilled jobs. Tommy growing up in a community with a future, not just a past. "What's the catch?" he asked finally. Morgan smiled slightly. "You'd have to work with me. I'm told I can be demanding." "That's not what I meant." "I know." She sobered. "The catch is that the Aurora system is cutting-edge military technology. Security protocols, government oversight, deadlines that can't be missed because lives depend on our systems functioning correctly in the field." She paused. "And resistance from competitors who won't be happy about Adler Aeronautics expanding its production capacity." Jack thought of Edward Maxwell, the rival CEO Morgan had mentioned during their first meeting. Men like Maxwell didn't appreciate upstarts disrupting their comfortable oligopolies. "I need time to think about this," he said finally. "This isn't just about me. It affects Tommy, the whole town." Morgan nodded. "Of course. But don't take too long. The Aurora contract requires additional production capacity within 6 months. If not here, I'll need to look elsewhere. She handed him a business card with her private number written on the back. Call me when you decide. As Morgan prepared to leave, a school bus stopped at the corner and a familiar small figure jumped down, backpack bouncing. Tommy spotted the Tesla immediately and raced toward the garage, eyes wide with excitement. "Ms. Morgan," he called, skidding to a stop beside them. "You came back. Did your car break again?" Morgan's expression softened in a way Jack hadn't seen before. "No, Tommy. Just visiting your dad to discuss some business. How's that flying machine coming along?" "I got first place at the science fair," Tommy beamed. "And now I'm building a real drone with a camera. Mr. Wilson gave me some old parts from when he worked at the mill." "A drone with a camera?" Morgan glanced at Jack with raised eyebrows. "Nothing sophisticated," Jack explained. "Basic remote control with a cheap wireless camera." Tommy's learning about control systems and aerodynamics. Morgan crouched at Tommy's level, her corporate demeanor melting away. "You know I make drones for a living, big ones that fly for hours and can see things from miles away." Tommy's eyes widened. "Really, could I see one sometime?" Morgan glanced up at Jack, a question in her eyes. He gave a slight nod. "Maybe someday soon," she told Tommy. "If your dad and I work together on a special project." After Morgan departed, Jack watched the Tesla disappear down Main Street, his mind churning with possibilities and concerns. Tommy tugged at his sleeve, full of questions about Ms. Morgan and her drones, but Jack's answers were distracted, non-committal. That evening, after Tommy was asleep, Jack sat on the front steps of the garage, nursing a beer and staring at Morgan's business card. The proposal was tempting, professionally challenging, financially secure, and a chance to revitalize the community he loved. But years in special forces had taught him to look for hidden dangers, to question convenient solutions. He pulled out his phone and dialed a number he rarely used. "Captain Reynolds, it's Jack Sullivan. I need some intel on Adler Aeronautics and their CEO, Morgan Adler, and a company called Maxwell Industries." His former commanding officer's voice came through, surprised but willing. "Sullivan, been a while. This sounds interesting. Give me a day or two to ask around." Jack ended the call and looked up at the stars, unusually bright above the darkened town. Change was coming to Riverdale Mills one way or another. The question was whether he would help shape that change or simply watch it happen. 2 days later, Jack Sullivan stood at the edge of the abandoned Keystone Steel Complex, the massive buildings silhouetted against the morning sky. Beside him, Frank Wilson shifted his weight, leaning on his cane as they surveyed the property that had defined Riverdale Mills for generations. "My father brought me here for my first job in '63, Frank said, his weathered face contemplative. "Started in the foundry, worked my way up to precision machining before Vietnam. Place employed 200 people at its peak. 3 shifts, 7 days a week during the war years." Jack nodded, trying to imagine the complex alive with workers, the blast furnaces, glowing rail cars arriving with raw materials and departing with finished steel. Now broken windows stared like empty eye sockets from brick walls stained with decades of industrial output. Nature had begun reclaiming the edge of saplings, pushing through cracked concrete vines, climbing rusted chain-link fences. "What do you remember about the East Wing?" Jack asked, pointing to a low-slung building set apart from the main production halls. "The blueprints show it as research and development, but it's built like a bunker." Frank's expression shifted subtly. "Restricted area. Even when I was shift supervisor, I needed special clearance. Something to do with government contracts." He hesitated. "Why all these questions about the old mill, Jack, this about that woman in the fancy car?" Jack had known Frank too long to lie. "Morgan Adler, CEO of Adler Aeronautics. She wants to convert the mill into a drone testing facility. Offered me a position running it." Frank's eyebrows shot up. "Running it, that's a hell of a step up from fixing Buicks." "She knows about my military background. Thinks my experience with drone systems in Afghanistan makes me qualified." Jack kicked at a piece of broken concrete. "I'm still deciding." Frank studied him, eyes shrewd beneath bushy gray eyebrows. "This town's dying, Jack. You know that better than most. Young folks leave businesses close. Another 10 years, Riverdale Mills might not exist except as a name on old maps. You think I should take the offer?" Frank looked back at the abandoned mill. "I think opportunities for rebirth don't come along often, for people or towns." He gripped Jack's shoulder with surprising strength. Your daddy would have said the same. Jack nodded, grateful for the old man's wisdom. If I do this, I'll need your help. Your knowledge of the mill, those people who worked here. Count me in. Frank's eyes gleamed with renewed purpose. Always wanted to see this old girl come back to life before I checked out. Later that morning, Jack called Morgan Adler. The conversation was brief, direct, his military efficiency matching her corporate precision. I'm in with conditions, he stated without preamble. I pick my team, I set the operational procedures. No corporate politics or bureaucracy that interferes with getting the job done right. Agreed. Morgan replied, her tone suggesting she'd expected nothing less. What else? Local hiring priority, training programs for Riverdale residents. And I keep Sullivan's Fix-It running. This town needs a mechanic and Tommy needs stability. A pause. That's an unusual arrangement, but workable. The garage could serve as a cover for some of our more sensitive operations. Not a cover, a legitimate business that continues to serve this community. Another pause, longer this time. Understood. I'll have contracts drawn up, including provisions for local hiring and your continued operation of Sullivan's Fix-It. One more thing, Jack added. I want access to the mill complex immediately before lawyers and corporate security get involved. I need to assess the structural integrity, the potential hazards. This place has been abandoned for 15 years. You'll have it by tomorrow. I'll expedite the preliminary purchase agreement with Hudson Capital. The following day, Jack received an official-looking envelope containing temporary access credentials, preliminary safety documentation, and a satellite phone with a direct line to Morgan. The purchase agreement was proceeding rapidly with an expected closing within 2 weeks. Jack assembled a small team for the initial inspection himself, Frank Wilson for his knowledge of the facility, and Harold Jenkins, an 80-year-old retired engineer, who had worked in the mill's technical department for 40 years. The three men represented a living historical record of Keystone Steel's operations, with combined experience spanning from World War II to the facility's closure in 2008. They entered through the administration building, flashlights cutting through dusty darkness. The reception area's grandeur had faded but remained impressive: marble floors, wood-paneled walls, and a massive relief sculpture depicting the steel-making process. Harold ran his fingers along the sculpture, smiling faintly. Commissioned in 1952 to commemorate the mill's expansion after the war, he explained. Artist was a local boy who'd lost an arm at Guadalcanal. Wanted to honor the home front effort. They moved deeper into the complex, documenting structural concerns, evaluating electrical and plumbing systems, and identifying areas that could be repurposed for drone testing and development. Frank's knowledge proved invaluable, pointing out where machinery had been removed, which buildings had been reinforced for heavy equipment, which areas had suffered water damage from neglected roof maintenance. By mid-afternoon, they had covered most of the main production facilities. Jack checked his hand-drawn map against the blueprint Morgan had provided. The East Wing is next, the R&D building. He looked at Harold. You worked in technical services. What can you tell us about that section? Harold's expression grew guarded. Classified work. Started during the Korean War, expanded during Vietnam. Something to do with specialized alloys for aircraft. But you must have gone inside, Jack pressed gently, for maintenance, equipment, installation. Harold nodded slowly. Upper levels, yes, but there were lower levels. Basement facilities I never saw. Rumors about government work that wasn't just steel production. He tapped his temple. Security clearances beyond what most of us had. Frank frowned. I heard those rumors too, Cold War stuff. But I always figured it was just talk, like the stories about tunnels connecting to the old limestone mines. Jack's interest sharpened. Tunnels? Just stories, Frank repeated, but his eyes shifted away. You know how people talk. The East Wing stood apart from the main complex, connected by an enclosed walkway. Unlike the soaring industrial spaces of the production halls, this building was squat, utilitarian, with fewer windows and thicker walls. The entrance featured a security checkpoint that had once required badge access, now lying dormant and dust-covered. Jack tested the handle of the reinforced door. Locked as expected. He pulled out a small toolkit from his pocket, old habits from military service. You're not planning to break in, are you, see? Harold asked nervously. Not breaking in. We have authorized access to the entire facility. Jack worked the lock mechanism with practiced skill. just exercising that access through unconventional means. The lock yielded with a heavy click. Jack pushed the door open, revealing a darkened corridor lined with offices and laboratories. The air inside was stale but surprisingly dry. The building's robust construction had prevented the moisture damage evident elsewhere in the complex. They moved methodically through the first-floor flashlight beams, revealing abandoned workstations, empty filing cabinets, and technical equipment too outdated to salvage during the closure. Jack noted the unusual security features: reinforced doors, specialized ventilation systems, and evidence of sophisticated surveillance equipment that had been removed. This wasn't just R&D for commercial steel, he muttered, examining mounting brackets where cameras had once been installed. This was a secure facility. In what appeared to be a central control room, Harold pointed to a large electrical panel partially hidden behind a movable whiteboard. That's not standard for this era, much more sophisticated than anything we had in the main plant. Jack examined the panel. Unlike the clearly labeled electrical systems elsewhere in the mill, this featured an unusual numerical keypad and indicator lights that suggested it controlled more than just power distribution. "Frank, you mentioned rumors about lower levels," Jack said, running his fingers along the edge of the panel. "Any idea how they might have been accessed?" Frank hesitated, then pointed to the floor in the corner of the room. "If they existed, freight elevator access would be logical. That reinforced section of flooring doesn't match the rest." Jack moved to the indicated area, crouching to examine the seams in the concrete. Subtle but unmistakable, a large square section with barely visible outlines. He ran his flashlight along the edges, then stood and systematically examined the walls nearby. Behind a metal cabinet, he found a small, recessed panel with another keypad. Unlike the electrical panel, this one showed no signs of power. "Harold, when did you say the classified work started here?" "Early 1950s, expanded in the 60s during Vietnam." Jack nodded, thinking. Cold War security systems, military protocols from that era. He tried to sequence the date Operation Paperclip officially ended, when German scientists were integrated into American military research. The panel remained dead. "We need power to this section," he decided. "Let's find the master electrical controls." It took another hour to locate and activate the building's backup generator system. As the lights flickered to life and ventilation fans began to spin for the first time in 15 years, the three men returned to the control room. The panel now showed active status lights, the keypad illuminated. Jack tried several code combinations based on significant military dates from the Cold War period. On his seventh attempt using the date of the first U-2 spy plane flight, the keypad emitted a series of beeps and a mechanical hum vibrated through the floor. In the corner, the disguised freight elevator platform began to descend. "My God," Harold whispered. It was real. The platform lowered to reveal a concrete shaft descending into darkness. After confirming the elevator mechanism was functional, the three men cautiously stepped onto the platform and activated the descent control. They dropped smoothly into the earth beneath the mill complex, the shaft walls revealing incredible construction, reinforced concrete at least 2 feet thick. The elevator stopped at a massive steel door marked with faded but still visible security warnings in a Department of Defense identification code. The door featured no apparent handle or conventional lock, but rather an early electronic security system now long dormant. "No way we're getting through that without power to the security systems," Frank observed. Jack examined the doorframe carefully, then the surrounding walls. "Maybe, but facilities like this always have emergency protocols. Manual overrides in case of power failure or enemy action." His military training guided his search, looking for inconsistencies in the construction sections that didn't quite match. Near the floor, partially hidden by a junction box, he found a small access panel secured with a simple mechanical lock. This would have contained the manual release for authorized personnel during emergencies, Jack explained as he worked the lock. "Standard procedure for secure facilities even today." The panel opened to reveal a hand crank mechanism. Jack rotated it steadily, muscles straining against decades of disuse. Gradually, the massive door began to retract into the wall, revealing a darkened corridor beyond. The air that escaped carried a strange quality, not the mustiness of abandonment, but the sterility of a sealed environment. Jack's flashlight beam penetrated the darkness, illuminating a sight that left all three men speechless. Before them stretched a vast underground complex far larger than the building above suggested. The central chamber featured high ceilings, specialized work areas, and most surprisingly, evidence of advanced technology from an era when computers still filled entire rooms. But what captured their attention was suspended from the ceiling in the center of the main chamber, a partially disassembled aircraft unlike anything from the 1960s. Its design was sleek, unusual, with swept wings and a profile that suggested extraordinary speed. Though clearly incomplete, its features hinted at capabilities beyond conventional aircraft of that period. "What the hell is that?" Frank whispered. Harold stepped forward, his aged face pale in the flashlight beam. "Project Oxcart, had to be. We made specialized heat-resistant alloys, but they never told us what for." He shook his head in wonder. "The A-12, predecessor to the SR-71 Blackbird." Jack circled the suspended aircraft professional assessment, overriding his astonishment. "This isn't just a manufacturing facility. This is a development lab for the most advanced reconnaissance aircraft of the Cold War." He moved to a workstation where technical diagrams remained spread across a table preserved in the sealed environment. What he saw made his blood run cold. "Not just the aircraft," he said quietly. "Look at these." The diagrams showed early designs for unmanned aerial vehicles, drones, decades before they became standard military technology. Primitive by modern standards, but revolutionary for the 1960s. "Project Eagle's Eye," Harold read from a faded folder. "I never knew." Jack examined the technical specifications with growing concern. "These designs, they're testing remote piloting systems, aerial surveillance capabilities." Frank joined him at the table. "Why would they abandon all this? Just leave it sealed away." Jack carefully turned pages in the folder, scanning documents marked with the highest security classifications of the era. His expression darkened as he read. "Because something went wrong." He pointed to incident reports, medical evaluations. "Test flights in 72, unusual atmospheric phenomena, health issues among personnel." He looked up at his companions. "They shut it down, sealed it up, classified everything." Harold sank into a dusty chair, suddenly looking every day of his 80 years. There were rumors, people getting sick, nothing confirmed. Management said it was just normal industrial hazards, steel dust, chemical exposure. He rubbed his face. "God, how many people suffered because of what happened here?" Jack continued examining documents, his military experience helping him piece together the narrative. According to these reports, they were testing advanced propulsion systems, experimental fuels. Something went wrong during atmospheric testing, and they just walked away. Frank's voice held controlled anger. "Sealed it up and pretended it never happened." "Classic containment protocol for the era," Jack replied grimly. "Deny, classify, contain, the Cold War playbook." He gathered the most relevant documents, carefully photographing others with his phone. "We need to document everything but disturb as little as possible. This isn't just about converting the mill anymore. This is about uncovering the truth." As they continued exploring the underground facility, Jack's mind raced with implications. Morgan Adler wanted to establish a drone testing center in Riverdale Mills, unaware that the location had once housed a secret predecessor to her company's technology, a program abandoned because of hazards that might still affect the community today. The question that troubled him most: was this discovery a coincidence, or was there some connection between Adler Aeronautics and this classified Cold War project that had been buried beneath Riverdale Mills for over 50 years? News of Adler Aeronautics' interest in the abandoned Keystone Steel Complex spread through Riverdale Mills like wildfire. Martha's Diner became the unofficial information clearinghouse, with Frank Wilson holding court in his regular booth, sharing carefully edited versions of what they discovered during the inspection. Jack had sworn Frank and Harold to secrecy about the underground facility until he could determine the best course of action. Morgan Adler returned 3 days after their discovery, this time with a small team of Adler Aeronautics executives and technical specialists. They established temporary headquarters in the town's only office building, a 2-story brick structure that had once housed the mill's administrative staff before being converted to municipal offices as the town contracted. The mayor, sensing economic salvation for his struggling community, expedited permits and zoning adjustments. The town council unanimously approved preliminary agreements. Riverdale Mills awakened from its 15-year economic slumber, a current of cautious optimism flowing through the community. Jack divided his time between Sullivan's fix-it caring for Tommy and confidential meetings with Morgan about the facility conversion. He had shared nothing about the underground complex, yet gathering more information and considering the implications. 1 week after the discovery, Jack sat in his office reviewing Project Eagle's eye documents late into the night. The technical aspects fascinated him. Drone prototypes decades ahead of their time, innovative remote control systems, and advanced materials that would still be considered cutting edge today. But the incident reports troubled him deeply. Test pilots suffering mysterious symptoms, unusual atmospheric effects during flight tests, and engineering challenges that seemed to defy conventional physics. A knock at the door startled him. Jack quickly covered the documents with repair invoices before calling, "It's open." Morgan Adler entered looking surprisingly casual in jeans and a light sweater, a stark contrast to her usual corporate attire. She carried a leather portfolio and what appeared to be takeout bags from Martha's diner. "Working late?" she asked, setting the bags on his desk. "Martha mentioned you hadn't been in for dinner, so I brought burgers." Jack raised an eyebrow at the unexpected gesture. "Thanks. Tommy's at a sleepover at his friend Mike's house." "I lost track of time." Morgan settled into the chair across from his desk, extracting wrapped sandwiches and containers of fries. "The purchase agreement closed today. Keystone Mill officially belongs to Adler Aeronautics." She passed him a burger. "Congratulations are in order, Project Director Sullivan." Jack accepted the food but didn't share her celebratory mood. "You move fast. 2 weeks from proposal to purchase is lightning speed for a 30-acre industrial acquisition. When I want something, I don't waste time." Morgan unwrapped her own sandwich. "The corporate legal team is processing your contract. As requested, you'll maintain ownership of Sullivan's Fix-It while directing the Riverdale drone operations." Jack took a bite of his burger, using the moment to organize his thoughts. The discovery beneath the mill had complicated everything. He'd run background checks on Adler Aeronautics, finding nothing suspicious, just a family-owned defense contractor that had successfully pivoted to drone technology under Morgan's leadership. Her grandfather had founded the company after World War II, focusing initially on aircraft components before expanding into electronic systems. "Something's bothering you." Morgan observed her keen eyes, missing nothing. "Second thoughts." Jack set down his food. "Not exactly, but there are complications with the facility that weren't in the inspection reports. Structural issues, environmental concerns." "You could say that?" Jack hesitated, then made a decision. "I need to show you something tomorrow. Something that could affect the entire project." Morgan's expression shifted to alert concern. "How serious?" "Potentially very, but I need your word that what I show you stays between us until we determine the best approach." She studied him intently. "You're being unusually cryptic, Jack. That's not like you." "Trust me, Morgan. This requires discretion." After a moment, she nodded. "You have my word. First thing tomorrow. Dawn, before the town wakes up." They finished their meal discussing safer topics, the preliminary staffing plan, equipment requirements, and timeline for the facility conversion. Throughout the conversation, Jack noticed Morgan watching him with heightened curiosity, trying to decipher what discovery could possibly warrant such secrecy. After she left, Jack locked the documents in his safe and checked his phone. A text from Captain Reynolds, his former commanding officer. "Information you requested on Maxwell Industries? Call secure line." Jack dialed immediately, stepping outside to ensure privacy. "Sullivan R." Reynolds answered on the first ring. "Interesting rabbit hole you sent me down. What did you find?" "Maxwell Industries has been quietly buying property around abandoned military research facilities from the Cold War era. 6 acquisitions in the past 3 years, all former Black Project sites." Jack's pulse quickened. "Any pattern to the sites?" "All connected to experimental aircraft or drone development between 1960 and 1975. All shut down under unusual circumstances." A pause. "And here's where it gets interesting. Edward Maxwell's father served as Deputy Director of Special Projects at the Pentagon during that period. He would have had oversight of these programs." Jack leaned against his truck, processing the information. "What about Adler Aeronautics? Any connection to these sites?" "Nothing direct. William Adler, the founder, supplied components to some of the programs, but was never inside the security perimeter." Reynolds' voice lowered. However, there's something else you should know. Maxwell Industries has been monitoring Adler Aeronautics' activities closely, very closely, industrial espionage-level surveillance. How do you know this? Let's just say I still have contacts in the intelligence community who owe me favors. Maxwell has hired former intelligence operatives to track Morgan Adler's movements, business dealings, technology development. Jack thought of the underground facility, the documents he'd discovered. If Maxwell knew about Project Eagle's Eye and its connection to Riverdale Mills. One more thing, Reynolds added. Maxwell Industries submitted a bid for the Keystone Steel Complex 3 months ago, withdrawn suddenly last month without explanation. Thanks, Captain. I owe you. Just be careful, Sullivan. When defense contractors start digging up Cold War secrets, things tend to get complicated, and sometimes dangerous. The call ended, leaving Jack with more questions than answers. He looked up at the night sky stars, partially obscured by clouds moving in from the west. Tomorrow he would show Morgan what lay beneath the mill. Her reaction would tell him whether she was an unwitting player in a larger game or part of it. Dawn arrived with a heavy mist shrouding Riverdale Mills, the abandoned steel complex looming like a ghost ship through the fog. Jack waited at the main gate, thermos of coffee in hand, when Morgan's Tesla appeared silently through the mist. She stepped out wearing practical clothes, hiking boots, cargo pants, and a light jacket, clearly prepared for something more rigorous than a standard inspection. "You look like you're gearing up for an expedition," Jack commented, handing her a cup of coffee. "Your cryptic warning suggested something beyond a routine structural issue." She accepted the coffee gratefully. "I came prepared." Jack appreciated her adaptability, another quality that reminded him of good field officers he'd served under. "What I'm about to show you goes beyond structural concerns. It could change everything about this project, maybe even your company's direction." He led her through the administration building, following the same path he'd taken with Frank and Harold days earlier. As they approached the East Wing, he provided a brief history of the mill's classified work, carefully observing her reactions. Morgan listened intently, asking occasional clarifying questions that revealed genuine curiosity rather than foreknowledge. When they reached the control room with its hidden elevator access, her expression showed professional interest but no recognition. "A secure facility within a civilian manufacturing plant," she noted. "Not uncommon during the Cold War. My grandfather mentioned similar arrangements at other industrial sites." Jack activated the elevator platform. "What we found below goes well beyond typical classified manufacturing." As the platform descended, Morgan's composure remained steady, though her eyes widened slightly at the impressive engineering of the shaft. When the massive security door came into view, she studied it with the analytical assessment of someone evaluating historical technology rather than encountering something familiar. "Department of Defense security protocols from the 1960s, she observed, "similar to installations my grandfather described from his contract work." Jack operated the manual override and the door retracted to reveal the underground complex. Morgan stepped forward, then stopped abruptly, her professional mask slipping for the first time since Jack had met her. "My God," she whispered, taking in the suspended aircraft, the workstations, the technology frozen in time. "Is that what I think it is? A-12 prototype, part of Project Oxcart, precursor to the SR-71 Blackbird." Morgan moved through the facility with increasing amazement, examining equipment documentation and technical diagrams with the eye of someone deeply versed in aerospace development. Her reaction seemed genuine, not the performance of someone who had anticipated this discovery, but the wonder of an industry expert encountering her field's hidden history. When she reached the drone prototype documentation, her expression shifted from amazement to professional fascination. "Project Eagle's Eye." She read carefully, examining the technical specifications. "These designs, they're revolutionary for the era. Some of these concepts weren't successfully implemented until decades later." Jack watched her closely. "According to the documentation, the project was terminated in 1972 after a series of incidents. Test flights resulted in unexplained atmospheric phenomena and health issues among personnel." Morgan looked up sharply. "What kind of health issues?" Jack handed her the medical reports he'd compiled. "Neurological symptoms, respiratory problems. Some cases progressed to more serious conditions." He paused. "The project was shut down, the facility sealed, and everything classified. The workers were never told what they had been exposed to." Morgan read through the documents, her expression darkening. And the town was never informed, no health monitoring, no environmental assessment. Nothing we can find, classic Cold War containment strategy. She set the documents down carefully, visibly processing the implications. Jack, this could be catastrophic for the project. Potential environmental contamination, health risks, historical liability. She looked around the facility. Not to mention the media circus if this becomes public. That's not all. Jack explained what he'd learned about Maxwell Industries' pattern of acquiring properties connected to classified Cold War research and their previous interest in the Keystone Complex. Morgan's expression hardened. Edward Maxwell, always one step behind us, looking for leverage. She paced the room, thinking aloud. His father's Pentagon connection explains a lot. He might know exactly what's here and what it means. The question is, what do we do with this information? Jack gestured to the underground facility. This isn't just about building a drone testing center anymore. This is about uncovering the truth about what happened here, what people in this town might have been exposed to. Morgan stopped pacing, facing him directly. You're right, this changes everything. Her voice took on a resolute quality Jack hadn't heard before. But not in the way you might think. She moved to the technical documentation, spreading out Project Eagle's eye diagrams. Jack, do you understand what we've found? This isn't just Cold War history. These designs, these concepts, they're the foundation of modern drone technology, including Adler Aeronautics Systems. Jack nodded slowly. I recognize some of the base principles in your Aurora drone schematics, because they evolved from these concepts. The aerospace industry built on these foundations, often without knowing the original source. Morgan's eyes held a new intensity. We have an opportunity here that goes beyond a testing facility. We can uncover the truth, address any environmental or health impacts, and honor the innovation that happened in here, innovation that was buried for half a century. Jack studied her, searching for signs of deception or corporate calculation. Instead, he found what appeared to be genuine conviction. What exactly are you proposing about a dual approach? We proceed with the drone facility as planned, but with a parallel effort documenting this historical site, conducting environmental and health assessments in the community, and creating transparency around what happened here. Morgan met his gaze directly, including potential compensation for affected families. That could cost millions, impact your company's relationship with the Department of Defense. It's the right thing to do. Morgan's voice carried absolute certainty. My grandfather built Adler Aeronautics on innovation and integrity. If our technology evolved from work that harmed this community, we have a responsibility to make it right. Jack felt something shift between them, a new understanding based on shared values rather than just professional respect. Perhaps Morgan Adler wasn't the cold corporate executive he'd initially assumed. Perhaps she was something more complex, a businesswoman with principles navigating the often unprincipled world of defense contracting. We'll need to move carefully, he cautioned. Maxwell will be watching, and if he knows about this facility, he might try to use it against Adler Aeronautics. Morgan nodded grimly. Edward Maxwell would absolutely use this information to derail the Aurora contract and damage my company's reputation. We need to control the narrative, get ahead of any potential exposure. I know some people who can help. Frank Wilson and Harold Jenkins. They worked here during that era. They can connect us with other former employees, families who might have been affected. And I'll bring in environmental specialists, medical researchers, quietly under the guise of standard site assessment for the new facility. Morgan's mind was clearly racing ahead, formulating strategy. We'll need to establish a secure communication protocol. This stays between us and essential personnel until we have a complete assessment. As they ascended from the underground facility, the morning sun had burned away the mist, illuminating the mill complex in harsh clarity. The enormous buildings stood as monuments to American industrial might, now harboring secrets that could affect both Riverdale Mill's future and the legacy of Cold War military research. Neither Jack nor Morgan could have anticipated how quickly their careful planning would be disrupted, or that the threat would come not from industrial rivals or government agencies, but from Jack's personal past returning with devastating timing. The preliminary work on the Adler Aeronautics facility proceeded rapidly over the next 2 weeks. Survey teams mapped the complex, engineers assessed structural integrity, and security personnel established perimeters around the property. Jack assembled his core team, including Frank Wilson as historical consultant and several former military colleagues with drone experience, while Morgan shuttled between Riverdale Mills and Washington, D.C., securing necessary approvals and managing corporate expectations. The underground facility remained their closely guarded secret, accessed only by Jack Morgan and a small team of environmental specialists sworn to confidentiality. Initial testing revealed trace contaminants in the sealed environment, but no immediate hazards, a promising start, though comprehensive analysis would take months. Riverdale Mills experienced an economic and psychological renaissance. The local newspaper, reduced to a weekly publication during the town's decline, resumed daily editions to cover the development. The diner expanded hours to accommodate the influx of contractors and specialists. For the first time in 15 years, help wanted signs appeared in storefront windows. Tommy thrived amid the excitement, proudly telling schoolmates that his father was working with real drones now. Jack made sure to maintain their normal routines: breakfast together each morning, helping with homework each evening, and weekend fishing trips to the creek that ran behind their property. But he couldn't deny that their lives were transforming. On this particular Friday afternoon, Jack was reviewing security protocols for the facility with Morgan in the temporary project office they'd established downtown. Tommy was expected on the school bus at 3:30, after which they planned to examine newly discovered technical documentation from the underground facility. Jack's phone rang. The school principal, Barbara Hernandez. "Mr. Sullivan, there's a situation with Tommy." Her voice carried professional calm layered over concern. "A woman arrived claiming to be his mother, requesting to take him early for a doctor's appointment. When we called you for confirmation and couldn't reach you, she became insistent." Jack's blood ran cold. "Is Tommy safe?" "Yes, he's in my office. The woman is in the front office. She has identification showing she's Diane Sullivan and legal documentation that appears to grant her parental rights. I'm on my way. Don't release Tommy to anyone until I get there." Jack ended the call, already moving toward the door, explaining the situation to Morgan in clipped sentences. "Do you need me to come with you?" she asked, concern evident in her voice. "No, better if you stay here. This is personal." The drive to Riverdale Elementary took less than 5 minutes, but each second stretched painfully. Diane had made no attempt to see Tommy in person for 4 years. Phone calls had dwindled to monthly, then quarterly check-ins, her voice increasingly that of a distant acquaintance rather than a mother. Why return now without warning? What legal documentation could she possibly have? Jack parked haphazardly in the school lot and strode through the main entrance, the familiar hallways now feeling ominously foreign. In the front office, a woman stood with her back to him, speaking intently to the school secretary. Even from behind, he recognized her immediately. Diane's posture, her gesturing hands, the way she tilted her head slightly when making an emphatic point. "Diane." His voice came out steadier than he felt. She turned, and Jack felt the disorienting collision of memory with present reality. Diane at 34 looked both exactly as he remembered and completely transformed. The casual beauty that had first attracted him remained, but now packaged in expensive tailoring and professional polish. Her blonde hair, once worn long and loose, was now cut in a sleek bob that emphasized her sharp cheekbones and determined jawline. "Jack." Her voice held the practiced neutrality of someone who had rehearsed this moment. "You're finally here. What are you doing, Diane? Why didn't you call first? Would you have agreed to see me, to let me see Tommy?" The question hung between them, its answer obvious to both. Jack turned to the school secretary. "Where's Principal Hernandez?" "In her office with Tommy, Mr. Sullivan." "Thank you." He addressed Diane formally. "We should continue this conversation somewhere private, not in the school office." She gathered an expensive leather briefcase, adjusting her posture in a way that triggered Jack's tactical assessment skills, a person preparing for confrontation, establishing dominance. Whatever had brought Diane back to Riverdale Mills, it wasn't maternal longing alone. Principal Hernandez met them in the hallway outside her office, a petite woman whose commanding presence belied her small stature. "Mr. Sullivan, Tommy's inside drawing. He's a bit confused about the situation. Thank you for protecting him, Barbara." She nodded, glancing between Jack and Diane with the practiced neutrality of an educator who had witnessed countless family dramas. "Would you like to use my office?" Please, just give me a moment with Tommy first. Inside, Tommy sat at a small table concentrating intently on a drawing of what appeared to be a drone design. He looked up as Jack entered, relief washing over his features. Dad, Ms. Hernandez said Mom is here, but I needed to wait for you, and I didn't know what was happening, and Jack crouched beside him, placing steady hands on his shoulders. It's okay, buddy. Everything's fine. Your mom did come to visit, which is unexpected. She's waiting outside. Would you like to say hello to her? Tommy's expression turned uncertain and vulnerable in a way that made Jack's protective instincts flare. Is she staying or just visiting? Just visiting for now. We need to talk about some grown-up things, so Ms. Hernandez is going to take you to the library for a little while. Is that okay? Tommy nodded, then asked in a small voice, Did I do something wrong? Is that why Mom came back? Jack pulled him into a hug, his voice fierce with certainty. Absolutely not. You've done nothing wrong. You're the best kid any father could ask for. This is about grown-up stuff, not about you. After Tommy left with the principal, Jack took a deep breath and opened the door for Diane. She entered with the confident stride of someone accustomed to corner offices and courtroom authority, setting her briefcase on the desk. He's gotten so big, she said softly, a hint of genuine emotion breaking through her professional veneer. His eyes are still the same. What are you doing here, Diane, 4 years without a visit, and you show up unannounced at his school? She straightened, the momentary vulnerability vanishing. I've been following the news about Riverdale Mills, Adler Aeronautics' new drone facility, your involvement as project director. Jack's tactical assessment shifted from personal to professional threat detection. You're tracking news about a defense contractor's facility development. That's not typical reading for a New York attorney. I'm not in New York anymore. I'm with Brennan Maxwell and Associates in Washington. She delivered this information with the precision of someone placing a key piece on a chessboard. We represent Maxwell Industries' legal interests. Maxwell Industries? Edward Maxwell, the rival CEO who had been tracking Adler Aeronautics and researching Cold War military sites. The connection crystallized with jarring clarity. You're here because of the facility, Jack's voice hardened, not because of Tommy. Diane had the grace to look momentarily uncomfortable. It's more complicated than that. Yes, Maxwell Industries is concerned about Adler's expansion into Riverdale Mills. But seeing the news coverage recognizing you, it made me realize how much I've missed in Tommy's life. Convenient timing. Jack remained standing, unwilling to cede the psychological advantage of height. What exactly does Edward Maxwell want with Riverdale Mills? That's privileged information, Jack. But I can tell you that my firm believes the development may be proceeding without proper environmental and historical assessment. She removed documents from her briefcase. However, I'm here today on personal business. I've filed a motion for joint custody of Tommy. She slid the legal papers across the desk. Jack didn't touch them. Joint custody. After 4 years of birthday cards and occasional phone calls, I made mistakes. I was building my career, establishing myself. Diane's voice took on a rehearsed quality that Jack recognized from military press briefings, prepared talking points delivered with manufactured sincerity. But Tommy deserves to know his mother, to benefit from the opportunities I can provide: private schools, cultural experiences, connections for his future. He deserves stability, consistency, people who are actually present in his life. Jack finally picked up the document, scanning the legal language with growing anger. You're claiming changed circumstances as grounds for custody modification, that I'm exposing him to potentially hazardous conditions through my work with military drone systems. Diane had the decency to look uncomfortable. The filing is standard procedure, perhaps overly aggressive. We can negotiate arrangements that work for everyone. This isn't a corporate merger, Diane. This is our son's life. Jack set the papers down with deliberate control. What does Maxwell really want? Because this isn't about Tommy. A subtle shift in her posture confirmed his suspicion. Edward Maxwell has concerns about the Keystone Steel site, historical liabilities, potential environmental issues. He believes Adler Aeronautics may be proceeding without proper due diligence. The pieces locked into place. Maxwell knew about Project Eagle's Eye. He was using Diane and the custody battle as leverage to either force information from Jack or disrupt the Adler Aeronautics development. So you're using our son as a corporate pawn. Jack's voice remained level, but cold fury radiated beneath the surface, threatening to disrupt his life, his sense of security to advance Maxwell's business interests. It's not like that. For the first time, Diane's composure cracked. Yes, the timing relates to Maxwell's concerns, but I genuinely want to reconnect with Tommy, to be part of his life. On your terms, when it's convenient for your career. Jack leaned forward. The custody filing is dated 3 days after the Adler Aeronautics project was announced publicly. You didn't even try to call me first to discuss visitation to ease Tommy into reconnecting with the mother who abandoned him. I didn't abandon him. I left him with his father, who I knew would provide stability while I established my career. Diane attempted to regain control of the conversation. And now I can offer him advantages you can't. Educational opportunities, connections, financial security. He has security, he has community, he has a father who's present every day. Jack gathered the legal documents. I'll have my attorney review these. In the meantime, if you want to see Tommy, we do it properly with advance notice, structured visits that prioritize his emotional well-being, not your corporate agenda. Diane seemed about to argue, then reconsidered. That's reasonable. I am staying at the Westbrook Inn. Perhaps dinner tomorrow. A chance for Tommy to get reacquainted with me in a comfortable setting. Jack nodded curtly. I'll discuss it with Tommy and let you know. But understand this, Diane, if you're using our son as leverage against the Adler project, you're making a mistake. A serious one. After Diane departed, Jack remained in the principal's office, allowing his military training to process the threat assessment. Diane's return, connected to Maxwell Industries, created vulnerabilities on multiple fronts, personal, professional, and potentially regarding the classified discovery beneath the mill. He called Morgan Adler. We have a problem, he said without preamble. Maxwell Industries knows something about the Keystone site. They've sent an attorney to investigate my ex-wife, Diane. She's filed for joint custody of Tommy using my involvement with the drone facility as justification. Morgan's sharp intake of breath carried through the phone. Jack, I'm so sorry. This is despicable, even for Edward Maxwell. It gets worse. She's with a law firm that specializes in environmental litigation and historical property claims. Maxwell is positioning for leverage over the Project Eagle's Eye discovery. Meet me at the office in 30 minutes. Bring Tommy. We need to develop a response strategy immediately. When Jack and Tommy arrived at the project office, they found Morgan engaged in intense conversation with Richard Chen, her assistant, and a distinguished older woman Jack hadn't met before. Jack, this is Patricia Harrington, Morgan introduced, former Department of Justice attorney, now Adler Aeronautics' chief legal counsel. Patricia, this is Jack Sullivan, our Riverdale project director. The silver-haired woman extended her hand with the confidence of someone who had navigated Washington's power corridors for decades. Mr. Sullivan, I understand we're facing both personal and professional complications. Tommy, sensing the adult tension in the room, had settled in a corner with his tablet engrossed in a drone flight simulation game Morgan had provided during a previous visit. Jack explained the situation in detail. Diane's sudden reappearance, her connection to Maxwell Industries, the custody filing, and the implied threat to the project. Patricia Harrington took notes, occasionally asking clarifying questions with laser precision. This is a two-pronged attack, she concluded, using personal leverage against Mr. Sullivan while positioning for information about the underground facility. Classic Edward Maxwell, he fights dirty when direct approaches fail. Morgan paced the small office. We need to protect Jack and Tommy while securing the Project Eagle's Eye information. If Maxwell exposes the discovery before we've completed environmental assessments and developed our public disclosure strategy, it could derail everything. First things first, Patricia interjected. Mr. Sullivan needs proper legal representation for the custody matter. I can recommend several excellent family law attorneys who understand high-pressure situations. Cost is no object, Morgan added quickly. Adler Aeronautics will cover all legal expenses. Jack started to protest, but Patricia raised a hand. This isn't charity, Mr. Sullivan. It's pragmatic business strategy. Maxwell is targeting you because of your connection to our project. We protect our people. The phrase, we protect our people, resonated with Jack's military experience. Unit cohesion, looking out for your team, Perhaps corporate America wasn't entirely different from special forces in some fundamental values. "Thank you," he said simply. "But there's something else we need to discuss." He looked toward Tommy, ensuring he was still absorbed in his game. "I believe Maxwell knows about Project Eagle's Eye specifically." Diane mentioned historical liabilities and environmental issues related to the site. Morgan and Patricia exchanged glances. "That's concerning," Patricia acknowledged. "If he has documentation about the project, he could create significant complications, regulatory delays, public relations challenges, even potential contract review by the Pentagon. We need to accelerate our assessment and disclosure strategy," Morgan decided. "Patricia, how quickly can we establish a health monitoring program for current and former Riverdale residents and a transparent historical documentation project? With proper resources, 2 weeks for initial implementation. But it will be expensive. Make it happen, whatever it costs." Morgan's tone brooked no argument. "Jack, can you connect Patricia with Frank Wilson and other long-term residents who might have health concerns related to the facility?" Jack nodded, but his mind remained partly focused on the personal threat, Diane's custody claim, and its potential impact on Tommy. Morgan seemed to read his thoughts. "Jack, I meant what I said about legal support, but there's something else to consider." She hesitated, uncharacteristically uncertain. "I could testify in any custody hearing about your character, your commitment to Tommy, the responsible nature of the work we're doing here." The offer surprised him. "You'd do that? Put yourself in the public eye, potentially exposing aspects of the project prematurely." "For you and Tommy, yes." Morgan's gaze was steady, direct. "Some things matter more than corporate strategy or government contracts." A new understanding passed between them, something beyond professional respect or shared goals. Jack had misjudged Morgan Adler from the beginning, seeing only the polished corporate executive rather than the person beneath, someone with principles, loyalty, and unexpected compassion. "Thank you," he said, the words inadequate but sincere. The strategy session continued into the evening, developing responses to both the personal and professional threats. Tommy eventually fell asleep on the office couch, his tablet displaying drone flight patterns even in sleep mode. Jack covered him with his jacket, watching his son's peaceful expression with a fierce protectiveness that transcended any corporate battle or custody dispute. Morgan joined him, speaking softly to avoid waking Tommy. "We'll protect him, Jack. And the town. Whatever Maxwell is planning, we'll be ready." Jack nodded, but a cold certainty had settled in his gut, the calm before combat that every soldier recognizes. Diane's return marked only the opening move in a complex game with stakes far beyond corporate contracts or custody arrangements. Project Eagle's Eye, buried beneath Riverdale Mills for half a century, contained secrets that powerful interests wanted to remain hidden. The battle for Riverdale Mills and for Tommy's future had only just begun. The Westbrook County Courthouse stood like a sentinel of justice, limestone and granite pillars, and purpose dating back to 1892, when steel and coal built America. Now, on a crisp November morning, Jack Sullivan climbed those worn steps with his son's hand firmly in his. Tommy wore his only suit, outgrown at the sleeves, his face solemn with the gravity children sense before understanding it. "You remember what I told you, buddy?" Jack knelt, straightening Tommy's clip-on tie. "I just have to tell the truth," Tommy replied, his blue eyes serious. "And remember that you and Mom both love me, even if you don't love each other anymore." Jack nodded, his throat tight. "That's exactly right. And no matter what happens in there, nothing changes between us. I'm still your dad. You're still my best buddy." Behind them, Morgan Adler ascended the steps, dressed in a conservative navy suit, her corporate armor replaced by something more approachable. Beside her walked Patricia Harrington and James Connolly, the family law specialist they'd retained. For 3 weeks, they had prepared for this preliminary custody hearing, gathering character witnesses, documenting Jack's parenting history, developing counter-arguments to Diane's claims about the drone facility's alleged dangers. "Ready?" Morgan asked, her hand briefly touching Jack's shoulder. The gesture didn't go unnoticed. From the courthouse entrance, Diane observed the interaction, her legal team flanking her. Edward Maxwell himself stood slightly apart, his presence confirming what they had suspected. This hearing transcended a custody dispute. It was a battlefield in Maxwell's corporate war against Adler Aeronautics. Inside the courtroom's oak paneling and heavy furniture spoke of traditions older than anyone present. Judge Eleanor Fitzgerald, 72, with silver hair and penetrating eyes, had presided over family court for 30 years. Her reputation for cutting through legal maneuvering to focus on children's welfare gave Jack cautious hope. Preliminary hearing in the matter of custody modifications Sullivan versus Sullivan, the clerk announced. The Honorable Judge Eleanor Fitzgerald presiding. The judge studied the assembled parties over reading glasses. I've reviewed the filings. Before we begin formal arguments, I'd like to clarify my approach. This courtroom is not a venue for corporate disputes or environmental litigation. My sole concern is the welfare of the minor child Thomas Joseph Sullivan. Her gaze settled on Maxwell. Those with interest beyond the child's welfare may find themselves unwelcome in my courtroom. Maxwell's expression remained impassive, but he shifted slightly in his seat. Diane's attorney rose first, Philip Brennan, senior partner in his firm, known for aggressive litigation strategies. His opening statement painted Diane as a mother who had made difficult choices for career advancement, now established and ready to provide educational and cultural opportunities beyond what Riverdale Mills could offer. Furthermore, Brennan continued, recent developments raise concerns about the child's environment. Mr. Sullivan's involvement with military drone technology brings potential security risks. The facility's location, a former industrial site with unknown environmental hazards, presents additional concerns. Jack tensed, but Patricia Harrington touched his arm reassuringly. They had anticipated this angle. James Connolly rose next, his folksy demeanor belying a razor-sharp legal mind. Your Honor, this case is fundamentally about stability and consistent parenting. Mr. Sullivan has provided both since Thomas was 3 years old. While Ms. Sullivan built her career in New York and Washington, Mr. Sullivan built a home. While she sent occasional birthday cards, he attended every school event, doctor's appointment, and bedtime story. He gestured toward Jack. Mr. Sullivan declined lucrative opportunities that would have taken him away from his son. He prioritized parenting over career advancement, a value judgment that deserves this court's respect. The hearing proceeded through witness testimony. Diane presented colleagues who attested to her professional accomplishments and financial stability. Her new apartment in Georgetown had a bedroom decorated for Tommy, though he had never seen it. She had researched private schools with strong science programs, anticipating his interests. When Diane herself testified, Jack recognized the polished performance that had first attracted him years ago, her ability to present compelling narratives that left audiences wanting to believe. But Judge Fitzgerald's expression remained unreadable. Her questions focused on practical parenting rather than future promises. Ms. Sullivan, please describe your son's daily routine, the judge requested. Diane hesitated, the question catching her off guard. Well, I understand he attends Riverdale Elementary. He's quite bright, especially in science and mathematics. I didn't ask about his academic strengths. I asked about his daily routine, bedtime, morning preferences, food allergies, or sensitivities. We haven't had the opportunity to establish those routines yet, Diane admitted, but I'm committed to learning them. Judge Fitzgerald made a note. Continue. Jack's witnesses included Tommy's teacher, Frank Wilson Martha, from the diner, and other community members who testified to his consistent presence in parenting. Dr. Sarah Mitchell, Tommy's pediatrician since birth, described Jack's unwavering attendance at appointments and detailed knowledge of his son's health history. When Jack's turn came to testify, he spoke directly and simply about his life with Tommy, their morning rituals, weekend fishing trips, nightly reading sessions, and the model airplanes they built together. He acknowledged the town's limitations, but emphasized the community support that had helped them thrive. Regarding the Adler Aeronautics facility, Jack addressed the elephant in the room. All safety protocols exceed federal standards. Tommy has never and will never access sensitive areas. The environmental assessment is the most comprehensive ever conducted in Riverdale Mills, specifically to ensure community safety. Brennan rose for cross-examination. Mr. Sullivan, isn't it true that the Keystone Steel Complex has a classified history of military research, that potential contaminants may exist on site? Patricia Harrington intervened. Objection, Your Honor. Outside the scope of this custody hearing and veering into privileged information regarding ongoing environmental assessment. Sustained, Judge Fitzgerald ruled. Mr. Brennan, confine your questions to parental fitness, not corporate investigations. The courtroom tensed when Morgan Adler took the stand. Her testimony had been carefully prepared to address Jack's character without revealing sensitive information about Project Eagle's Eye. Ms. Adler, Connolly began. Please describe your professional relationship with Jack Sullivan. Morgan sat poised, her voice clear and measured. I hired Mr. Sullivan to direct our Riverdale operation because of his technical expertise, leadership abilities, and problem-solving skills. However, what truly distinguished him was his unwavering commitment to balancing professional responsibilities with parenting. He structured his role specifically to maintain stability for his son. And have you observed Mr. Sullivan's parenting directly? Yes, I've seen him adjust multi-million-dollar project timelines to accommodate school events. I've watched him help with homework while managing facility security protocols. Most importantly, I've observed the mutual respect and affection between father and son that comes only from years of consistent, engaged parenting. Brennan approached for cross-examination, his expression suggesting he sensed opportunity. Ms. Adler, what is your personal relationship with Mr. Sullivan? The question hung in the air, its implication clear. Jack straightened, but Morgan remained composed. Mr. Sullivan is a valued colleague who has become a friend. My presence here today reflects Adler Aeronautics' commitment to supporting our team members, particularly when they're targeted because of their professional affiliations. Her gaze shifted briefly to Maxwell. Nothing more, nothing less. You've been observed having dinner together, visiting his home outside of business hours? Brennan pressed. Objection, Connolly interrupted. Irrelevant and approaching harassment. Sustained, Judge Fitzgerald agreed. Mr. Brennan, unless you have evidence that Ms. Adler's interactions with Mr. Sullivan have negatively affected Thomas, move on. Brennan retreated, but the moment had revealed Maxwell's strategy imply impropriety to undermine Jack's stability narrative. The final witness was Tommy himself. Judge Fitzgerald conducted this interview in chambers away from the tension of the courtroom. When they emerged 30 minutes later, the judge's expression had softened slightly, while Tommy appeared relieved. Judge Fitzgerald settled behind the bench, reviewing her notes before delivering her ruling. Custody modifications require substantial changes in circumstances and clear evidence that such changes serve the child's best interest. Ms. Sullivan has demonstrated financial stability and sincere desire to reconnect with her son. However, desire is not the same as demonstrated commitment. She turned to Diane. Ms. Sullivan, your career choices were yours to make, but choices have consequences. You cannot be absent for 4 formative years of a child's life and then expect the court to disrupt the stable environment his father has provided based on promises of future advantages. Diane's expression tightened, but she remained professional. Mr. Sullivan has proven himself a consistent, engaged parent who prioritizes his son's well-being and above all else. The evidence shows a child thriving in his care, surrounded by a supportive community. The judge removed her glasses. I deny the motion for joint physical custody at this time. Jack exhaled slowly, feeling Tommy's hand slip into his. However, Judge Fitzgerald continued, I am establishing a graduated visitation schedule to reintroduce Ms. Sullivan into Thomas's life in a structured manner. Initially supervised weekends, progressing to overnight visits if proven successful. The court will reassess in 6 months based on demonstrated commitment, not future promises. As the hearing concluded, Tommy looked up at Jack. Does this mean I stay with you? Yes, buddy, but you'll get to know your mom better too, gradually in ways that feel comfortable for you. Across the courtroom, Jack met Diane's gaze. Something passed between them, not reconciliation, but perhaps the beginning of understanding. She nodded slightly, then turned to confer with her legal team. Maxwell, however, watched Morgan with cold calculation that sent warning signals through Jack's tactical assessment. This battle was won, but the war for Project Eagle's Eye and Riverdale's future continued. 2 days after the custody hearing, Jack and Morgan stood in the underground facility beneath the mill, surrounded by environmental specialists in protective gear, taking samples from every surface. The discovery had been partially disclosed to regulatory authorities, a carefully managed revelation that presented Adler Aeronautics as responsible stewards, uncovering historical issues rather than potential victims of scandal. Initial results confirmed trace contaminants consistent with experimental fuels and metallurgical testing. Elena Rodriguez reported consulting her tablet. However, the contamination appears contained within the sealed environment. No evidence of groundwater penetration or soil contamination beyond the facility walls. Morgan nodded, relief visible in her expression. In the health assessment program, we've begun confidential medical screening for former mill workers and their families. Dr. Rodriguez continued, 37 individuals have participated so far. We're seeing some patterns of respiratory and neurological conditions above statistical norms, but nothing catastrophic like the cluster effects we feared. Jack studied the documentation from Project Eagle's Eye spread across a workstation. The research itself was revolutionary control systems for remote piloting, advanced materials for high-altitude operations, sensor technologies decades ahead of their time. He looked up at Morgan. Your grandfather's components were integrated throughout the prototype designs. William Adler never knew the full scope of the project, Morgan said quietly. The compartmentalization was extreme even for that era. He provided specialized circuit boards and control surfaces, believing they were for conventional aircraft. Rodriguez excused herself to oversee additional testing, leaving Jack and Morgan alone among the ghosts of Cold War innovation. Maxwell is planning something, Jack said, voicing the concern that had shadowed them since the courthouse. The custody hearing was just the opening move. He wants this technology, this history. Morgan nodded grimly. Our sources in Washington report unusual activity, Maxwell meeting with Pentagon officials filing Freedom of Information requests about historical aerospace research. He's building towards something. We need to control the narrative. Release the information on our terms. Agreed. Patricia has prepared disclosure documents for the Pentagon, EPA, and local authorities. We acknowledge the discovery, outline our environmental and health monitoring programs, and position Adler Aeronautics as responsibly addressing historical issues others ignored. Jack considered the strategy. It might work for the regulatory side, but what about the human impact? The families affected by whatever happened here deserve more than corporate statements. Morgan studied him, her expression softening. You're right. What do you suggest? A town hall meeting, complete transparency about what we found, what we're doing about it, and commitments to those affected. Before Maxwell can weaponize this information, we make it public, but with compassion, not corporate damage control. Morgan hesitated, years of corporate instincts warring with the principle before her. It's risky. The Pentagon won't appreciate public disclosure of classified historical projects even decades old. Our military contracts could face scrutiny. Some things matter more than contracts, Jack echoed her words from weeks earlier. You said that about Tommy. The same applies to this town. Their eyes met in the dim light of the underground facility, understanding passing between them that transcended professional collaboration. Morgan nodded, decision made. We'll hold the town hall next week. Full disclosure, complete commitment to health monitoring and compensation where appropriate. She took a deep breath. And I'll personally explain how Adler Aeronautics technology evolved from these foundations, acknowledging our ethical responsibility. 3 days later, as preparations for the town hall progressed, Jack received an urgent call from Frank Wilson. Jack, you need to see this. Maxwell Industries representatives are at Martha's Diner talking to former Miller workers, offering settlements in exchange for health information and confidentiality agreements. Jack arrived at the diner 15 minutes later to find Edward Maxwell himself holding court in the largest booth surrounded by elderly former mill employees. Martha caught Jack's eye from behind the counter, her expression worried. They've been at it for hours, she whispered as Jack approached, offering cash payments for signed agreements. Most folks haven't taken the offer, but they're tempted. Times are hard, and Maxwell's throwing around serious money. Jack approached the booth, positioning himself where all could see him. Afternoon, gentlemen. Mr. Maxwell, this is unexpected. Maxwell looked up, his silver hair immaculate, his expression calculated affability. Mr. Sullivan, I was just discussing Riverdale's industrial heritage with these fine gentlemen. Fascinating stories about the mill's operations. And offering settlements for health claims that haven't been fully assessed, Jack added. Interesting timing just before our town hall to discuss the Project Eagle's Eye discovery. A murmur ran through the assembled men. Maxwell's smile tightened imperceptibly. Project Eagle's Eye, I'm not familiar with that designation. Aren't you? Your father oversaw it as Deputy Director of Special Projects at the Pentagon. The experimental drone program beneath Keystone Steel that was shut down in 1972 after personnel developed unexplained health conditions. The elderly men exchanged glances, pieces falling into place after decades of questions. Harold Jenkins spoke up, his voice quavering, but determined. That's what we were working on. Drones, they told us it was specialized alloys for conventional aircraft. Compartmentalization, Jack explained. Most workers knew only their specific tasks, not the overall project. He turned back to Maxwell. What's your interest in buried Cold War technology? Mr. Maxwell, professional curiosity or something more personal? Maxwell gathered his documents, professional mask firmly in place. Merely conducting standard due diligence on potential historical liabilities affecting Riverdale properties. Maxwell Industries has always taken community health seriously. By buying silence before the facts are just known, Jack challenged, the town hall next week will present complete findings from environmental and health assessments, along with a comprehensive monitoring and compensation program. No confidentiality agreements required. Maxwell stood buttoning his tailored suit jacket, a noble gesture from Adler Aeronautics, though one wonders how the Pentagon will respond to public disclosure of classified historical projects. The threat was thinly veiled. Some doors once opened cannot be closed. After Maxwell departed, Jack addressed the assembled men. Everything we've discovered will be shared next week. Complete transparency. I give you my word. Harold Jenkins studied him with rheumy eyes that had seen decades of industrial change. Your daddy would be proud, Jack. Joe Sullivan never could abide secrets that hurt working folks. The town hall was scheduled for Wednesday evening in the high school gymnasium, the only venue large enough to accommodate the anticipated crowd. By Tuesday afternoon, preparations were complete, presentation materials reviewed, and health specialists briefed on their roles. That evening, Jack and Tommy sat on their apartment's small balcony overlooking Main Street, watching the increased activity below as media began arriving for the event. The town hadn't seen this much attention since the mill's closure 15 years earlier. Dad, Tommy's voice was contemplative. Is Mom really coming back to visit more often now? Jack chose his words carefully. She wants to be part of your life again. The judge set up a schedule for visits starting this weekend. Just for the day at first, then maybe overnight visits later if everything goes well. Tommy nodded, processing this information with the deliberate thoughtfulness that sometimes made him seem older than 7. Is she still mad about Ms. Morgan and the drone project? It's complicated, buddy. Grown-up stuff about work and old feelings. Jack put his arm around his son's shoulders. But what matters is that both your mom and I love you. That never changes no matter what else happens. Tommy leaned against him, comfortable in the certainty of his father's presence. I like Ms. Morgan. She doesn't talk to me like I'm a baby. She explains how things really work. Jack smiled, remembering how Morgan had spent an hour showing Tommy the principles of drone control systems, treating his questions with the same seriousness she would give Pentagon officials. She respects your intelligence. Are you going to marry her? The question came with the blunt directness of childhood. Jack nearly choked on his coffee. What? No, buddy, we work together. We're becoming friends, but it's not like that. Tommy looked unconvinced. She looks at you the way Mrs. Henderson looks at Mr. Henderson when she thinks nobody's watching. Before Jack could formulate a response to this unexpected observation, his phone rang Morgan's ringtone. Sullivan, he answered, aware of Tommy's knowing smile. Jack, we have a problem. Morgan's voice carried controlled urgency. The Pentagon has issued a cease and desist order regarding any public disclosure of Project Eagle's Eye. Classification review pending. Jack straightened. That's impossible. The project ended 50 years ago. Maxwell pulled strings. He has connections through his father's old position. The order was delivered to our Washington office an hour ago. She paused. There's more. EPA officials will be at the town hall tomorrow with their own orders to assume control of the environmental assessment. Maxwell's attempting to bury everything, Jack realized. Control the narrative, limit liability, acquire the technology. Exactly. Patricia is fighting the order, but we need time. We may have to postpone the town hall. Jack watched the growing activity in the town below, local residents mixing with media, a community energized by the promise of truth after decades of questions. No, these people have waited 50 years for answers. We're not delaying. Jack, a Pentagon classification order isn't something we can ignore. The order restricts disclosing classified military technology, but the health impacts, the environmental assessment, the commitment to the community, none of that is classified. Jack's mind raced through tactical options. We adjust the presentation, focus on the human impact and our commitment to addressing it. The military technology aspects remain unaddressed pending classification review. Morgan was silent for a moment, calculating implications. It could work. We'd need to revise everything overnight. Then we'd better get started. The following evening, the Riverdale High School gymnasium overflowed with residents, media, and government officials. Temporary walls displayed historical photographs of the mill in operation charts explaining environmental testing procedures and information about the health monitoring program. Jack stood backstage with Morgan, Frank Wilson, and Patricia Harrington reviewing last-minute adjustments to their presentation. Through the curtain, they could see EPA officials in the front row, alongside men in dark suits who radiated Pentagon authority. Remember nothing about the specific technology or military applications, Patricia reminded them. We focus solely on the community impact and our commitment to addressing it. Frank Wilson adjusted his tie nervously. Never thought I'd see the day when the government showed up in Riverdale for anything besides collecting taxes. Morgan touched Jack's arm lightly. Are you ready? He nodded, drawing strength from the certainty that they were doing the right thing regardless of corporate or government pressure. Let's give these people the truth they deserve. The presentation began with historical context. Riverdale Mill's transformation from standard steel production to specialized military contracting during the Cold War. Frank Wilson described working conditions, the compartmentalized nature of classified projects, and the unexplained health issues that emerged among certain workers. Gerard Rodriguez presented preliminary health assessment findings, explaining the monitoring program being established for former workers and their families. Jack outlined the environmental testing process, emphasizing Adler Aeronautics' commitment to complete remediation of any identified issues. Throughout the presentation, the Pentagon officials remained stone-faced, while EPA representatives took constant notes. The audience listened with rapt attention, decades of questions, finally receiving answers, even if partial ones. When Morgan stepped forward for the final segment, she abandoned her prepared corporate speaking style for something more personal. Riverdale Mills built America with Pennsylvania steel and American determination. She began, echoing words Jack had used to describe the town. The men and women who worked here, including those who unknowingly contributed to classified programs, deserve our gratitude, our respect, and when their health was compromised, our commitment to making things right. She outlined the compensation program being established, medical care, financial support for affected families, and community investment beyond the drone facility's economic impact. This isn't about corporate liability management. Morgan continued, her voice carrying conviction that silenced the room. It's about recognizing that innovation built on hidden suffering isn't progress. It's exploitation. Adler Aeronautics refuses to repeat the mistakes of the past, even those we inherited rather than created. As the formal presentation concluded and the community engagement session began, Edward Maxwell made his entrance, timed for maximum impact, as residents lined up at microphones to ask questions. An impressive performance, he commented loudly enough for those nearby to hear, though one wonders what's being omitted under government order. Jack intercepted him before he could approach the stage. This isn't the place, Maxwell. Oh, I think it's exactly the place. Maxwell's smile never reached his eyes. These good people deserve the complete truth, don't they? About experimental drone technology developed beneath their town, about how Adler Aeronautics' current systems evolved from those classified origins. Your father helped bury that truth 50 years ago, Jack countered quietly. Now you're using it for corporate leverage. What changed? Something flickered in Maxwell's expression, a personal edge beneath the corporate calculation. My father believed in protecting national security interests above all else, including public health. He adjusted his designer cufflinks. I'm merely ensuring that valuable intellectual property doesn't fall exclusively into Adler's hands. This isn't about intellectual property. It's about people whose lives were affected, families who never knew why their loved ones developed unusual conditions. Maxwell's mask slipped further. My father died of early-onset Parkinson's disease. Unusual for a man with no family history. He supervised Project Eagle's Eye personally during critical test phases. For a moment, raw emotion broke through. No one ever made the connection. No one was held accountable. Jack studied the man with new understanding. Beyond corporate rivalry lay personal grievance, a son seeking acknowledgement of harm done to his father wrapped in the language of business competition. Then help us make it right, Jack suggested. Not through corporate maneuvering or Pentagon classification orders, but through truth and proper compensation. Your father was exposed to the same conditions as the workers here. Maxwell seemed momentarily thrown by this approach, years of corporate strategy challenged by simple human recognition. Before he could respond, commotion erupted at the main entrance. A small procession of elderly men and women entered, former mill workers in their 80s and 90s, some in wheelchairs, others using walkers or leaning on younger family members. Harold Jenkins led them, his frail frame standing as straight as his age allowed. The room quieted as this living history of Riverdale Mills made its way toward the front. Harold approached the microphone, his voice thin but determined. I worked at Keystone Steel for 43 years. The last 12 in what we now know was Project Eagle's Eye. We didn't ask questions during the Cold War. It was our patriotic duty to follow orders, maintain secrecy. He gestured to his companions. We're what's left of the Special Projects Division. We've lived with the consequences without understanding the cause. Harold turned to face Maxwell directly. Your father visited the underground facility 14 times between 1969 and 1972. I maintained the access logs. He knew the risks same as we did, but unlike us, he had the power to stop it, to warn people. His voice strengthened with moral clarity that comes only with age. Don't use our suffering and his as corporate ammunition, son. It dishonors us all. Maxwell stood frozen, corporate calculation warring with personal grief exposed before the community and media. For a moment, Jack glimpsed the wounded son beneath the CEO's armor. Morgan stepped forward, extending her hand to Harold in respect before addressing the assembly. Mr. Jenkins is right. This isn't about corporate competition or classified technology. It's about human impact and ethical responsibility. She turned to Maxwell. Edward, your father deserves acknowledgement too. Work with us, not against us. Help these people, all of them, receive the recognition and support they deserve. The gymnasium fell silent, the moment balanced between conflict and potential reconciliation. Maxwell's expression shifted through calculation, resistance, and finally something approaching resignation. I'll have my people contact your legal team, he said quietly to Morgan. Perhaps there's a more productive approach than litigation. As Maxwell departed, the community engagement session continued. Questions answered, concerns addressed, and most importantly, a half-century of silence finally broken. Jack watched as elderly former workers shared stories with younger residents, connecting Riverdale's past to its potential future through truth rather than mythology. Later, as they packed up presentation materials, Morgan joined Jack at the edge of the gymnasium. Not exactly how we planned it, but effective nonetheless. Sometimes the best missions unfold in the field, not in the planning room, Jack replied, falling back on military wisdom. Maxwell's personal connection explains a lot. Morgan nodded. Patricia thinks we can negotiate a collaborative approach, joint acknowledgement of the historical issues, shared investment in remediation and compensation. More productive than legal battles. In Project Eagle's Eye itself, the technology, historical documentation with appropriate security protocols, acknowledgement of its influence on modern systems without compromising current classified elements. She smiled slightly. Bureaucratic compromise at its finest. They walked together toward the exit, the empty gymnasium echoing with their footsteps. Outside, Riverdale Mills sparkled with more lights than usual, the temporary media presence and increased activity bringing energy to the normally quiet streets. Tommy asked if we were getting married. Jack mentioned casually, immediately wondering why he'd chosen this moment for such a revelation. Morgan stopped walking, surprised briefly, overtaking her composed demeanor. That's quite an assumption from a 7-year-old. He says you look at me the way Mrs. Henderson looks at Mr. Henderson when she thinks nobody's watching. Jack felt uncharacteristically awkward, like a teenager rather than a Special Forces veteran. Morgan's laugh was unexpected, genuine, unguarded, nothing like her controlled corporate chuckle. The observational skills of children are terrifying. She met his eyes directly. though not entirely inaccurate in this case. The admission hung between them, neither rushing to define its implications. "We should probably have dinner sometime," Jack suggested. "Not to discuss the project or custody hearings or classified Cold War technology. Just dinner. Just dinner. See where it goes from there." Morgan smiled, the professional mask fully absent now. "I'd like that, though I should warn you I don't have the best track record with relationships. Most men find my work schedule and intensity challenging. I spent 12 years in special forces, and now I'm raising a 7-year-old boy who builds functioning drones from cereal boxes. I think I can handle intensity." Their conversation was interrupted by Tommy himself running toward them from where he'd been waiting with Martha. "Dad, Ms. Morgan, did you see the news people? They put me on camera when I explained how drones work." As Tommy excitedly recounted his media debut, Jack caught Morgan watching them both with an expression that confirmed Tommy's observation about Mrs. Henderson. Perhaps the most unexpected outcome of Project Eagle's Eye wasn't technological revelation or corporate resolution, but the human connection forming between two people who would never have met without a storm, a stranded car, and buried Cold War secrets. Riverdale Mills had built America with steel and determination. Now perhaps it would help rebuild itself with truth technology and second chances for a town, for a father and son, and for a corporate executive discovering that success could be measured in more than quarterly reports and government contracts. The future remained unwritten, but for the first time in decades, Riverdale Mills faced that future with hope, rather than resignation, a community rediscovering its worth through the buried secrets of its past and the unexpected possibilities of its present. Spring's sunshine bathed the Keystone complex, now transformed into Adler Aeronautics Rural Operations Center. The main production hall gleamed with new glass and steel, while the historic brick exterior had been meticulously restored to honor the site's industrial heritage. American and Pennsylvania flags snapped in the breeze above the main entrance, where a simple bronze plaque acknowledged both the facility's new purpose and its complicated past. Inside, the first generation of Aurora drones moved through final assembly, their components blending cutting-edge technology with manufacturing traditions that stretched back to Riverdale's steelmaking days. Former mill workers retrained for precision electronic assembly worked alongside younger technicians recruited from surrounding communities. Frank Wilson, serving as historical operations consultant, conducted tours for visitors connecting the facility's past to its present with stories only he could tell. The underground Project Eagle's Eye facility had been carefully preserved as a historical research site accessible to cleared historians and technical specialists studying Cold War innovation. A joint historical documentation project between Adler Aeronautics and Maxwell Industries, part of their negotiated agreement, was preparing a declassified public exhibit about early drone development, scheduled to open in the town's renovated Historical Society building later that year. Downtown Riverdale Mills showed signs of revitalization. Martha's Diner now stayed open through dinner hours. 2 new restaurants had opened on Main Street, and the long-abandoned movie theater was undergoing renovation as a community arts center funded partly by the compensation program established for affected families. At Sullivan's Fix-It, Jack still handled vehicle repairs 3 days a week, maintaining the community connection he valued while directing drone operations the remaining time. The garage itself had expanded, adding an educational workshop where local students learned basic engineering and robotics under Tommy's enthusiastic assistant instruction. On this particular Saturday morning, Jack and Tommy prepared for their weekly fishing trip to Cedar Creek, a tradition maintained despite their changing circumstances. As Jack packed their gear, a Tesla pulled up outside. "Miss Morgan's here," Tommy announced, unnecessarily racing to the door. Morgan entered carrying a bakery box and dressed for outdoor activity, jeans, hiking boots, and a light jacket replacing her usual corporate attire. The past 6 months had softened something in her demeanor, the rigid corporate mask appearing less frequently as she divided her time between Washington and Riverdale. "I brought breakfast," she said, setting down the box to accept Tommy's enthusiastic hug. "And I thought maybe I could join this famous fishing expedition I keep hearing about." Tommy looked to Jack, excitement clear in his expression. "Can she, Dad? I can show her the secret spot where we caught that huge bass last time." "If she doesn't mind getting mud on those fancy boots," Jack teased, earning a raised eyebrow from Morgan. "These boots have hiked the Appalachian Trail," she countered. They can handle Riverdale mud. As they loaded gear into Jack's truck, Diane's BMW appeared at the curb. Tommy's weekend visitation schedule with his mother had evolved over the months, day visits progressing to occasional overnights at her new apartment in Pittsburgh, where she had relocated after leaving Maxwell's law firm for a position with a renewable energy company. The transition hadn't been without challenges, but a fragile co-parenting relationship had emerged. Diane acknowledged Jack's primary role while building her own relationship with Tommy, who approached this new family configuration with the adaptability of childhood. Mom, Tommy called, momentarily torn between fishing excitement and greeting his mother. Diane approached, nodding politely to Jack and Morgan. I know it's not my weekend, but I'm in town for a conference and thought I might take Tommy to lunch tomorrow after your fishing trip. That should work, Jack agreed easily. We'll be back by noon. Tommy looked between the adults, his father, his once absent mother, and Morgan, whose role defied simple definition, but whose presence had become increasingly important to both Sullivan men. Can we all have lunch together? He suggested with the innocent directness that frequently left adults without easy answers. Like a family lunch. A moment of awkward silence followed before Morgan spoke. That sounds like a great idea if your mom is comfortable with it. Diane hesitated, then nodded with surprising grace. Why not? I'd like to hear about this famous fishing spot. As they finalized plans, Jack surveyed the scene with quiet amazement. His son surrounded by people who cared for him, his community revitalizing around them, and his own life transformed in ways he couldn't have imagined that stormy night when a Tesla slid off the road and into his world. Riverdale Mills was finding its future by honestly confronting its past. Perhaps people could do the same. Tommy climbed into the truck, fishing rod clutched expectantly. Morgan and Jack exchanged a glance that acknowledged the journey ahead, professional, personal, and somewhere in between. Ready for an adventure? She asked a question that carried more meaning than its simple words suggested. Jack smiled, the weight of the past 6 months' custody battles, classified, discoveries, corporate negotiations balanced by the promise of what lay ahead. Always, he replied, and meant it.